Council be in session. This special meeting. quarter after 10, and we need Mr. Burnson, Mrs. Chick, Ms. Galanter, Mr. Goldberg, Mr. Holden, Mr. Ridley Thomas, Mr. Savornich, Mr. Wax, and Mrs. Walters. Please come to the council chamber. We have Mr. Fuhr here, Mr. Hernandez, Ms. Sikowski. We have 4 members. We need 6 more for a quorum. We have 9 members present. We need 1 for a quorum. Mr. Holden, Mr. Savarnich, Ms. Galanter is excused. Mr. Alatorre is out of town. Mr. Ridley Thomas went to a funeral. 20 minutes late, you can't speak for 20 minutes. If you're 30 minutes late, you can't speak for 30 minutes. Let me point out that this is a special meeting of the City Council on February 11th, 1999. There are 15 council districts in the city. The regular meeting days are Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We are currently being viewed by cable subscribers at this special meeting on Channel 35, and we're also being monitored by council phone. So we have the first item on the agenda, and the only item is the charter reform proposal. And I would like to introduce, could we have some attention, please? I would be pleased to introduce George Kiefer, one of our city's most distinguished citizens, and someone with an exceptional record of achievement in both the public and private sector. After graduation from the University of California at Santa Barbara, the Play School, his was the first job was as legislative assistant to the United States Congressman. He graduated from UCLA Law School and joined the now well-known firm of Manette, Phelps, and Phillips. He has served as a member of the Board of Regents of the University of California and two-time president of the California Community College Board of Governors. He was asked to represent the community colleges on the State Blue Ribbon Commission to review California Master Plan for Higher Education. The report of his commission was largely adopted by the California legislature. For a number of years, George served as chairman of the board of directors of the Center of Studies for Democratic Institutions. George was appointed to the Charter Reform Commission by City Attorney Jimmy Hahn, and it is clear that this commission has been exceptionally done very well, organizing and gone through the work with seriousness that has impressed everyone who observed it. And I think it's a considerable credit to the success should go to George Kiefer, who has been chair of this committee, raucous committee at times.
Play School Committee.
George.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members of the council. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of our commission to talk about the charter reform proposal we have presented to you. With me today is our director, Raphael Sonnenschein, and our staff counsel and deputy director, Mary Strobel. And together we will be going through the charter as quickly as possible with you, and then at the end I understand you would like us to be available for questions. Before you is a listing. It has 29 points on it. We won't be covering all of these in that much detail, but it gives you a sort of a roadmap of where we're headed in case there are items that you're particularly focused on. We will be getting to those through that outline. I want to begin again by thanking you for your tremendous support in this process, the resources you've provided, and the independence you've provided to us in this process have been very much appreciated. And the availability of your staff to answer questions when we needed help was most necessary. This has been an exciting and long and difficult and in the end rewarding process we've been through. And it's an exercise in charter reform that is not unique to Los Angeles, but American cities have gone through this periodically, and it's a necessary process of renewal in municipal government. This charter represents our best thinking to you from our commission. And I want to just begin by reminding you of your commission members. Here, there are a few names that aren't on the list who left the commission in process. This is the group that we ended with. The rest appears on your unified charter document inside cover. But I remind you of this list because of the members that you've appointed have been so qualified and so good, and the unique balance that they've brought to this commission of insiders and outsiders testing all of us. Just to point out some of these names that you know: Anton Kalea, former budget director for Mayor Bradley; Ed Edelman, formerly a member of this council and a member of the Board of Supervisors; Linda Griego, former deputy mayor; Bob Wilkinson, former council member, give us a perspective of having been in the government. At the same time, there are many members of this commission who had never really been associated with government and kept everyone honest by asking new and fresh questions. Alex Glickman, who identified herself originally as a pro-secessionist and has become very much a strong charter supporter and has been somebody who, from the business community, along with Luann Boylan, a number of members from the business community, and others. Also, the public sector was very much represented on this. Stuart Quo, as you know, heading a major public interest law firm and also a MacArthur Award winner. Joe Mandel, a former County Bar Association president and UCLA counsel. Doris Nelson, a former president of League of Women Voters. Charles Wilson, a former UCLA dean and head of the Wave, owner and publisher of the Wave publications. Andrew Friedman, an active community member in the Jewish community. Jose de Sosa, active in his community and a member, employee with Pac Bell. Also Charlie Mims, an employee of the city government. If you go through this list, this group represented insiders and outsiders as well, and I think we're very, very pleased to have that balance. The staff itself, I also want to reference Dr. Raphael Sonnenschein, as you know, long an expert on Los Angeles government and politics. Mary Strobel, we went outside to get a staff counsel from the city of Santa Monica because we had also the available, our counsel really is the city attorney's office, but working with the city attorney's office has brought a different perspective to this whole process. George Wolfberg and others who you know from the CAO's office, retired, but bringing us an insider's perspective again on the government. I think that's been very helpful to our process. We began with all of us meeting in a room downstairs here and attempting to define our own mission. And so I want to move to that mission statement next. And this has been deconstructed out of a lovely prose. We committed to make a comprehensive review of the charter. But I want to tell you that we had a lot of discussion about retaining what works and evaluating everything, but retaining what works and taking care of what does not. We wanted to address any impediments to this government, meaning you principally and the mayor and the other city officials operating. What impedes you from providing the best service to your constituents? And we wanted to engage the constituencies around the city, make sure that we did that. We began from the beginning, were we going to write a fresh new charter? And there were members of our commission who said, let's start from scratch and do the whole thing. And others said, no, this charter has served us well. In the end, I think what we decided was that we would work again with what worked and focused on what didn't work, and we used the current charter as an outline. We really thought that it would confuse you and confuse the government if the whole thing were thrown out and we started from scratch. But every part of that charter has been reviewed. The process has been very careful, very deliberate. There were those, you may remember in the beginning, who said we were moving too slowly. We insisted, however, on a work plan, on the hiring of staff before we began to discuss things. And our commissioners almost had an unstated rule. They weren't going to express their own opinions early on until they had heard a whole lot. So a whole year was spent actually just listening. We had public hearings, stakeholders talking to us from out the city, and at all times coordinated with staff members of the council and the government to check what we were hearing. We had focus groups, and we studied opinion polls as well. Keep going back and forth with what the public was saying and what we were hearing. Let me go to overall what we learned, and I want to make these 2 points in particular. First of all, it was clear to us that not all the problems that people were presenting to us were charter problems. That was clear. A lot of them weren't even the problems of the city of Los Angeles. They were problems of government. We heard about the MTA and the Board of Education and the rest. So we were very clear as we went through this that not all problems were charter problems, and we had to distinguish the wisdom that we would hope to achieve from the conventional wisdom we were hearing and analyze what we could do something about and what we really couldn't. The second important thing we learned, as we went through this over time, this city is a Western reform city with a tradition of professional government. To coin a phrase, it is not yet, and it is not New York, and it is not Chicago or Philadelphia. It has its own culture of politics surrounding its own culture. It is a reform city, meaning that early in this century, it broke away from tradition among big cities and went for civil service and a professional government and away from partisan politics that you had characterizing the big cities of the East. This is a city whose media does not cover the government like it does in New York or Chicago, and therefore the same scrutiny on the government is not the same. Therefore, we've had to rely on an openness of government here and a professional government so that things are not done behind the scenes in closed rooms. That we were very aware of as we went through the process and gathered a respect for as we continue through the process, that the political leadership of the city is always balanced against the professional leadership. It's not simply the mayor, council, and elected officials. There's a professional government that we're dealing with all the time. We also learned, however, that in our judgment there were some problems in the charter. First of all, and not a new theme, that the charter was more of an operating manual than a principal document. There were too many restrictions in it that had developed over 400 amendments over time that inhibited the way you act and the bureaucracy at times. And so we ought to be attempting to clear out some of that duplication and some of those old restrictions on how you operate, because the charter can only be changed with the vote of the people. Secondly, there was unclear authority in the charter. There's confusion. Now, the effort of Los Angeles to disperse authority and suspicion of authority centered in one place has also resulted in some confusion about who has authority, and that we ought to address that. And third, that participation in this city is difficult. It's the biggest city in the country by square miles. It's difficult to do anything. Everything is possible in Los Angeles, but it's difficult to find it unless you know where you're looking, and the government is not all that different in many respects. San Pedro is a long way from Chatsworth, and as we traveled the city for our hearings and so forth, we recognized people in San Pedro had a definite view that there were definite problems that people in Chatsworth didn't quite understand. And that was the size of this government and as well as the size of the city that present problems for participation of our citizens. So going to those issues, overall we tried to deal with flexibility, providing more flexibility to the government, meaning the mayor and the council, by taking the detail out of the charter. We try to remove conflicting and duplicative provisions and try to devolve authority to commissions where appropriate and make sure that everything doesn't have to be reviewed 6 times. The next slide I want to go to is accountability. I want to address this quite squarely. It was our judgment that while we wanted to maintain an understanding of the professional government and the rest, we wanted to increase the mayor's authority to manage at times, while retaining checks and balances of this council and other elected officials, and giving proper due to the professional government. We would clarify the roles of the city attorney, the clerk, the controller, and others. Let me say on this, in increasing the mayor's authority, we had rejected, after much discussion, a simplified view that there's an executive with a clear executive role and a legislative with a clear legislative role in municipal government. It is not the parallel with the federal government. Municipal government puts council members much, much closer to the people. And so it's not quite as clear as in the federal government. Secondly, we rejected the role of the mayor as the CEO in a corporate sense. We just don't think that the CEO of a corporation who reports to a board of directors is the same as the CEO, quote, of a city and the mayor. So we rejected that analogy. At the same time, we did believe that the mayor's authority to manage ought to be increased in this city. And the final area that we focused on was responsiveness. We are giving the public in this document an option to expand the size of this council, partly because this council represents more people by far than any other council in America per district, almost 250,000 per district. And we heard from many people throughout the city an urge to give an option to expand, and we'll talk about that, Rafe and I and Mary, in a minute in detail. Area planning commissions will be new. At least 5 area planning commissions to deal with planning issues. These area planning commissions would still serve cities that are bigger than almost all cities in America, save 10. They still serve populations of 500 to 800,000 people. Advisory neighborhood councils, I think it's going to be an exciting effort to help advisory neighborhood councils get going through a Department of Neighborhood Empowerments, and advisory districting commissions, also an element of responsiveness. In other areas of the charter, we've tried to provide more opportunity for the citizens' voices to be heard, to bring more credibility to what you do, and more interrelationship between you and the public. I want to cover one thing that would obviously come up is our discussions with the Joint Conference Committee. We have been meeting with members of the elected commission and have agreed on basic principles in this document. We've reconciled differences, sometimes great and sometimes very, very small, which the media has made larger than they really ought to be. Time frames for council overrides between 60 and 30 days. We pick 45 days, for example. And other bigger issues like should the mayor be able to fire general managers without your involvement, we agreed on a two-thirds override rather than a majority approval. Through that process, I believe we've maintained our principles and been able to reach a broad consensus that I think will help in the review and your involvement with your review process of this charter. In the end, I think I would go back to our goals of flexibility, accountability, and responsiveness. And what I'd like to do is Rafe and I will jump in, and Mary occasionally, to cover some of these points in more detail, following an outline that you see before you of those 29 points. And then I think we'll be available after that to answer questions. So, Rafe, if you could take it from here.
Let me point out, first of all, that the deadline for putting a charter on the ballot is March 5th. And if there is separate charters, the elected body will have to make sure that it is in here by March 5th to be on the June ballot. And after we start on these individual items from 10 on, we'll take each one at a time, and if council members have any questions, we'll allow them to speak.
Council member, would you mind if, Mr. President, would you mind if we could run through those? We'll go through those all and then come back to questions.
Okay, all right. That's fine with me.
Thank you, George. It's my task to walk through the details of what's in the Unified Charter, not covering every item that's in there because there are many specific provisions we won't get to, but to try to do the highlights, and then, of course, we'll be available to answer questions. One place to start is to simply show you the document in its most basic sense. The document is in 2 volumes, and the way it's divided is Volume 1 is governance, which covers the officers of the city, the departments, budget, elections, etc. And then Volume 2 is civil service and pension. It is important that everybody know that the 2 volumes have equal force as parts of the charter. There is no priority Volume 1, Volume 2, but it's meant for accessibility to be separated so that the governance issues are in one place and the civil service pension provisions are in another place. Before going into the details, just to tell you how the details are laid out, like all new constitutions that are built to last and to endure, the Unified Charter isn't really new. It's a tapestry of really 3 different types of provisions. Tried and true elements that remain largely unchanged from the existing charter. Very valuable positions that through modification are retooled to last for many more years. And thirdly, bold efforts to reach for new approaches that actually stretch the borders of governance beyond where we've been. And I think you'll recognize all 3 of these in the types of provisions that we talk about. I'd like to go through now some of the ways the Charter deals with the Unified Charter with the 3 issues that George indicated that were identified in this process. Let's begin with flexibility. Obviously, the Charter has been called an operations manual, implying that it has too much detail in it. To make it more flexible means a decision between 2 things, that which can be changed by ordinance by this council, and that which should be reserved in the Charter to a vote of the people. And the decisions you make as to which is which has great consequences. And just to show you that the existing Charter was once very young, this is the Charter of 1925. As it's been reprinted in the last few years. And as you can see, it's a very small document. And over the course of time, here's another look at the existing charter. And it's not through bad intent. It is simply that many more items have been put into the charter reserved to a vote of the people. The problem it creates is the loss of flexibility of what needs to be left to ordinance. And if you look at the chart here, it shows you that the Unified Charter has made some major changes toward moving items from the charter into ordinance where you can make decisions about it over the long period of time. Elections detail. A great deal of the detail about elections has been moved or will be moved to ordinance where you will be able to make changes. You should know that in the current charter there's even a picture of the actual form that has to be used for a candidate to be nominated to run for office, that's the kind of detail that should be done by ordinance. Secondly, a large amount of material on purchasing has now been moved to ordinance where you can design new procedures in ordinance, and now there's a new Section 380 that is exactly one paragraph long, which explains the availability of this process to you. Thirdly, civilian employee discipline, which now for discipline of 5 days and more is under the Civil Service Commission within the charter. The council does not have the option to design another system or to experiment or explore systems of arbitration such as are used in the Employee Relations Board. That's left to ordinance, and much of the detail in the departments is now to be left to ordinance. But at the same time, it's just as important what is not changed in the charter. And we don't have the time to go through all the provisions that remain within the charter that haven't been changed. There are quite a few. But to point out some of the most important ones, perhaps, the preservation of parkland, which has historically been part of the charter, is still there. The library and recreation and parks funds are still there. Prevailing wage, which is in the charter, is of course still there. And there are new core protections as a result of charter reform. One is that living wage, which is now in ordinance, is now enshrined in the charter and can only be changed by a vote of the people. The Ethics Commission, with only minor changes suggested by the Commission, is still there. The Police Commission Inspector General is not only still there, but has been significantly strengthened, and its independence and autonomy expanded. Campaign finance regulations are still there. And there's a new Section 104I guaranteeing equal access to employee benefits and strong anti-discrimination provisions, most of which had previously been in ordinance, are now enshrined in the charter. So even as provisions have been removed, important ones have been added that should be reserved to a vote of the people. Secondly, in the area of accountability, management authority has been diffused in Los Angeles government for many years. And the Commission has definitely taken the position that to clarify lines of authority means enhancing the mayor's ability to manage departments, but also, in that change, to preserve essential checks and balances. In the vision of the unified charter, city policy is still led by the council with the participation of the mayor, but oversight is conducted by the council and other independent and appointed offices within the city government. And we'd like to go through some of those broad provisions now. With regard to the city council, of course, the broad legislative authority of the city council is fundamental to the operation of the city government and is a core provision of the unified charter. But I would indicate that by moving more provisions to ordinance from charter, that legislative authority is now more important than it has ever been. Your scope for operation to utilize the legislative authority will have never been greater in the many years of the charter under the unified charter. Secondly, Prop 5 remains within the charter, but it is modified, and we will go in a moment to the modification. There's a new Section 245 that I'll go over. And thirdly, the voters have the option to keep the council the same size or to expand the city council. And one thing we heard many times was that it was important that the voters have the full range of options, including the option to keep the council exactly at the size of 15. And shortly I'll be able to go through how those options would be. Let's look briefly at Prop 5, which is formerly Section 32.3, is now Section 245 of the Unified Charter. As you can see, Prop 5 authority is retained in its full original sense for planning commission decisions. And that has a lot to do with the importance regarding litigation and other matters, that there need to be final decisions made in the planning area. There cannot be decisions going back and forth because of the consequences for the city in court. But in other matters, it is modified, and we believe this is one of those modifications to last for many years, to be a legislative veto, so it can be more of an oversight tool rather than a management tool. And as an oversight tool, it would have the function of allowing the council to block bad decisions that could be dangerous for the community made by city commissions. And we can always go into that in greater detail. There are some exceptions to that, but it is broadly a legislative veto. If we go to the next chart, I want to give you a sense of how the council size might look on the ballot, because this has been a little bit unclear in how it's been explained. The main charter proposal will have a yes/no option for the entire charter, and within that will be 15 council members. In other words, the council will remain as it is in the unified charter. There will be two separate measures on the ballot, both yes/no measures. One would expand the council to 21. Another would expand the council to 25 members. These would be designed as amendments to the main charter, which means they would only require a majority. They would not require more votes than the charter in order to be implemented. If either one got a majority, whichever one got more votes would take effect. So if 21 and 25 both got a majority, whoever got more votes, whichever measure got more votes, would take effect. However, neither one would take effect unless the main charter reform proposal is adopted. And let me just emphasize, that means that those separate amendments are not amendments to the current charter, only to the proposed new charter. In the area of the mayor's authority, as George indicated, the unified charter enhances the management authority of the mayor in a number of ways, some of which actually enshrine practice that is already in existence, and some of which are somewhat new departures. One is that the mayor has greater flexibility to structure his or her own office within budgetary limitations. The mayor would have the formal authority to issue executive directives which, if not contradicted by ordinance or charter, would be binding on departments. That is a tightening of what is already in practice, but it is a change. The mayor would represent the city in intergovernmental relations and supervise the operation of intergovernmental relations, and that is a change of authority. And the mayor would have an executive budget office that would assist in the development of the budget. There are a few other changes that we'll come into later on. Let's move to the what is currently called the CAO, and note that there has been a name change to the Office of Research and Administrative Services. The purpose of the name change is to fundamentally indicate that the name of the CAO's office is now to be more closely aligned with the actual function of that office, which has been to provide research and administrative support both to the mayor and to the council. And it is important to understand that in the unified charter, that dual role will continue, that this is considered one of the key professional offices within city government. That office will still conduct management audits and remain an independent budget resource available both to the city council and the mayor, and to be an objective source of information, as it has been for many years, widely trusted on all sides. The city attorney's office, there are some changes, but the first one is that this office is still elected citywide and still unifies criminal and civil functions. And as a side note, when we conducted our open houses over quite some period of months, there was extraordinarily strong public support for maintaining the city attorney in its current form, a bit to our surprise, but it was absolutely overwhelming. The council will retain broad settlement authority, as it does within the charter. However, by ordinance, the council will set amounts from which the mayor can settle smaller amounts of settlements, and a claims board can settle a middle amount, and the council would settle the largest amount, and those amounts would be set by ordinance. Once again, the ordinance playing an important role. The litigation structure would be revised, although the revisions would closely approximate existing practice, where the departments, where the mayor, where the council are in effect at stake in a particular issue, they would be in direction of litigation, but the city attorney would maintain the overall sense of umpire and referee about how that process would work. In the area of finance, there will be several changes in the unified charter. One is the development of a new Office of Finance, whose main goal is twofold. One is revenue collection, and it will take over the revenue collection task from the city clerk, but it will also propose to the council and to the mayor whether there are further revisions in that department and office that could unify functions within the government, but that would be brought to you as recommendations for study. That is not put in the charter. There is, of course, the Executive Budget Office that would work with the mayor in the preparation of the budget. The treasurer remains largely what the treasurer has been, an office carefully insulated by mayoral appointment and council removal. The authority to remove is with a majority of the council and would continue to be the custodian of city funds. The controller obviously remains still an elected office. There's a few revisions in that the current practice of delegating the pre-audit function to departments under the overall authority of the controller is now put into the charter as something that should be done on a regular basis as long as the controller keeps an oversight of that. The oversight role is also strengthened by the controller being authorized to conduct performance audits of departments. So there'll be a number of different auditing sources in the city, and as you can see, because of changes in management authority, the oversight role becomes even more important than it ever was before. As to departments, most of the departments remain largely the same. There are some changes in the Department of Planning, which we will talk about later on, and some changes in the Department of Public Works, which I'll mention in just a moment. Certainly the detail in departments where possible has been moved to ordinance, and once again, always make sure that there's a reassurance in your minds that when something is moved from the charter, it does not disappear. It is always to be placed in ordinance, already exists in ordinance, and that is an important part of the transition. Thirdly, in the Public Works Department, which has never had a general manager, the unified charter institutes a chief administrative officer, general manager, who will report to the Board of Public Works, which continues to have its managing authority over the department, but now there will be a general manager in place. Proprietary commissions are strengthened in the unified charter, particularly in the hiring and removal of general managers, which currently is a power that rests with the mayor, is given to the commission so as to strengthen the role of commissions and proprietary departments. Because of the great interest and importance on the next issue, which is general managers, I want to indicate how the Unified Charter handles the appointment and removal of general managers for non-proprietary departments. And this is covered in Section 508 of the Unified Charter. As currently, the mayor appoints and the council confirms general managers. Under the Unified Charter, a fundamental decision was made that the council must be involved continue to be involved in the removal of general managers. And there is, as you know, was widespread community debate over this, in which public opinion was also strongly heard confirming that view. The modification is that, unlike the current system, where it requires a council majority to approve the removal, the general manager has an appeal right, an appeal process, to go to the city council, and by a 2/3 vote, the council may reinstate the general manager. And that one is another one that we would refer to as a modification and a retooling of a valuable provision and protection. There are some modifications in civil service, very few, because there was a resolution to try to develop as much labor management accord in any change made in civil service, and there were extensive conversations with employee organizations and management on all these matters. In the area of exempt positions, which is in Volume 2 at the very beginning in Section 1001, the existing cap on exempt positions for managerial and technical positions remains at 150, except that the distinction between managerial and technical is not in the Unified Charter. But once again, the council has the flexibility by ordinance of a supermajority ordinance to expand the cap to meet needs that the city might have for exempt positions in future years. And the council also continues, although in a different process, to approve exempt positions as authorized under the cap. In the last area, which is responsiveness, what the Unified Charter is based on is the belief that there is no single magic bullet that will solve the problem of responsiveness in Los Angeles. It requires many different reforms, some big, some very modest, but hopefully that they will work together to create a climate of greater openness and greater accessibility. For the same reason, though, the city has little experience with such approaches, and instant results are unlikely. And the commissions have made a very strong statement that the ability of the city's institutions to govern effectively cannot be jeopardized in the interest of quick solutions, and that's how these various items are drawn. And if you look at them, some of which we will return to, neighborhood councils, area planning commissions, voter option to enlarge the council, excuse me, and a redistricting commission, we'll go back over these. But on the second page, I want to mention a few that are perhaps less visible. One is that under the Unified Charter, for the first time, the mayor is required on February 1st of each year to publicly present to the city council the priorities of his or her budget in public, so the public can hear it, the council can hear it well before the formal presentation of the budget to council, when the public process has generally begun. Secondly, the Airport Commission in the Unified Charter is expanded with 2 additional seats that are to be reserved for residents of the airport area, that area to be defined again by ordinance, by the council. The Harbor Commission, with its 5 members, one of those members is to be drawn from the harbor area, that area to be defined by ordinance. On the pension and retirement boards, 2 of the 3 boards until the Unified Charter had no representation by retired employees. Only the Lacers Board had such representation. Under the Unified Charter, both the DWP Pension Plan Board and the Fire and Police Pension Board will have retirees represented for the first time on those boards. There is also a provision to call for greater diversity in commission appointments for the first time, a very important provision within the Charter. It's been widely discussed over the years, and this is the first time where it will be implemented within the Charter. I'd like to turn to a few specifics now. One is the existence in the Unified Charter of redistricting commissions. And if we begin with 3 and then go back to 1, the council obviously continues to redistrict, and that authority has not been changed within the Unified Charter. However, in order to provide greater public access to a process that in recent years has drawn greater public attention because of the issue of neighborhoods and how neighborhoods can be best represented, a citizens commission will be created that will hold public hearings, and that commission will advise the city council, and that will hopefully become institutionalized as part of the process by which the city council makes these decisions. In the area of planning, there are some changes in the structure of the sections on planning. Currently, there is both a City Planning Commission and a Board of Zoning Appeals. Under the Unified Charter, the Board of Zoning Appeals is eliminated, and a 9-member citywide planning commission is in place that will handle the citywide issues. Area planning commissions are also created, which we will return to, that will provide an option, a very important option, we think, for people to have much, much closer access to government on the planning decisions that are closer to home. We think that's going to be one of the most exciting developments. And lastly, that there should be, as much as possible, limits of 1 level of appeal within the planning process, which is achieved by streamlining, but not taking out the important checks and balances in the planning process. We can skip the next one because we just covered the BZA and planning, and go to area planning commissions. Under the Unified Charter, there will be at least 5 area planning commissions, although the council, by ordinance, could make that a larger number. And once again, it must sound like a broken record how many times we say by ordinance, but that is fundamental to the spirit of the Unified Charter, that the word ordinance appears again and again in ways that it had not before. The boundaries of area planning commissions will be set by the council by ordinance. Commissioners will be required to live within the area, and these area planning commissions will have quasi-judicial power over variances, not over issues like the general plan and some of the broader issues that still come by recommendation to the city council from the citywide planning commission. But put in its most concrete terms, people who have specific issues involving planning in their communities will not have to hop on the freeway, go downtown, go through the downtown process, which often discourages people very greatly, and will be able to handle that at least at the first stage through the area planning commissions. And we think people will find that to be a terrific innovation for participation. Lastly, neighborhood councils, which have been discussed many years and have wide community interest and support. The Unified Charter, first of all, quite clearly creates advisory neighborhood councils. It does not create decision-making neighborhood councils. It creates advisory neighborhood councils. The model used is called self-selected and participatory, in which the neighborhood councils decide, with the assistance of the city government and the Office of Neighborhood Empowerment, how best to select their members and their officers. It's a participatory model meant to incorporate the widest range of interests within the community. And there will be a certification process whereby potential neighborhood council organizations will apply through an Office of Neighborhood Empowerment, and they will have to meet certain criteria that are in the charter. And once again, this gets to the question of governance, how important it is to maintain the governance of the city at the same time that participation is expanded. The Office of Neighborhood Empowerment, which is a new office in the charter, will develop a plan and regulations. In fact, this will be the first thing implemented under the unified charter. It would be implemented immediately, that the process of setting up such an office would take place. It would bring that plan to the city council. The city council would have a set period of time to adopt or revise the plan, to either pass ordinances that are consistent with what the charter says in terms of requirements. Otherwise, the plan will go into effect after a set period of time. And there will be a review of the process by a commission, advisory to the council, that would take place 7 years after the adoption of the charter, which probably means 5 years after the implementation of neighborhood councils. The experience of other cities, by the way, is that that review process is tremendously important. Some cities have said everything's going well and have continued. Other cities have taken major changes in the neighborhood council system as a result of the review. To conclude, Los Angeles is a very unusual city. And I say this both in my current job, but also as a student of urban government who studied Los Angeles long before I had this position. Its great heritage is a philosophy of good government, usually seen in small cities, but here seen on a very grand stage. And it's often been described in the literature that I am familiar with as America's largest reform city. The Unified Charter allows Los Angeles to have a charter that preserves the special status of Los Angeles in urban government. Los Angeles is not now, and nor will it ever be, just another big city. It's particularly meaningful to me to help in any way that I can, have been able to help in this process, because when I first moved to this city more than 20 years ago, I was one of the people floating in the back here. I was a staffer in the great and glorious 10th Council District, and came to deeply respect the processes of government in the city and how it differed from the government I had grown up with, and the openness and the ability to participate. But it had gaps. The charter has had gaps. And with this charter, the Unified Charter can help begin to close the gaps in flexibility, accountability, and responsiveness that may otherwise keep Los Angeles government from reaching its full potential. The Unified Charter presented here combines those three strands of enduring policy, modified structures for a new century, and some bold innovations that push the envelope. The tapestry, we all believe, is one that, if set into place for the voters' approval, will wear well for years to come. Thank you.
Mr. President, we're available, all three of us, to answer any questions that you or the council members may have.
Yeah. Why don't we have the public hearing first? There's people have been here, and let's have them, and then Mr. Wax.
Not on the substance, but we have a lot of documents. None of them, I gather, reflect the changes you made yesterday.
That's correct.
Okay, and you'll get that to us soon? Or-
Maybe you can tell us what they are.
Yeah, that's what...
Well, they're not finalized.
Through a conference committee process, we are meeting with members of the elected commission and in constant communication with your own staff with respect to drafting issues in particular. And in the area of the neighborhood councils, we added more specificity to the provisions of the charter dealing with neighborhood councils. If Councilman Wax, would you like us to talk about what those details are now, or because I think there are language changes that essentially put more detail into the charter with respect to the structure and what is expected from the new Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. We also made a decision with respect to police discipline to maintain that board as it is currently constituted. And some other drafting changes. One issue was with respect to succession. If the city attorney should be permanently vacant from the office, who appoints his successor, and that retains the appointment power in the city council to appoint the successor. But there's a requirement, if there are more than 2 years left on that term, that there's a requirement that the council hold an election for that spot. With respect to the mayor, if there's an immediate vacancy, a permanent vacancy, immediately it is filled in an acting way by the president of the council until the council appoints a successor. And again, if it's 2-year term or longer left, then an election must be held. We will be continuing to work with your staff on language changes. We are also in discussions with the mayor's office with respect to language changes or suggestions, and with the elected commission with respect to those points. The elected commission, as you know, has approved the document in principle, but does want to withhold its approval of the language itself until it's made a further decision. It's scheduled to meet on February 16th to review those changes. We hope we'll have all those changes done by then. But in this process, we will continue to receive also recommendations from your own staff, which has asked us to make those changes as we go along.
Have a public hearing, and then we'll turn it over. Julian Bromley, and then John Mack. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. President and council members. My name is Julian Blomley. I'm a Los Angeles resident and a member of the public, and sometimes feel like the only member of the public that's attended very many of the commission meetings for the last 18 months. I also have, I guess, expertise in working with municipal, state, federal, foreign and supranational government entities. So I have been appreciated the opportunity to learn about the charter of the city and have watched particularly the appointed commission of what's been done. I would like to thank the appointed commission, particularly the chair and the staff, for all the work that they've done over the last 2 years. And I'd also like to thank the work that the elected commission has done, though sometimes not quite as easily and happily as the appointed commission. And particularly I'd like to thank Professor Chemerinsky, who I think almost single-handedly has enabled the elected commission to participate and continue to be a member of the Unified Charter. The big issue of concern, I guess, and I will let all the professional people that have analyzed this line by line and word by word to go into all the specifics, but that the implementation date, I'm strongly in favor of the implementation date that was suggested in the January 27th first version of the Unified Charter. I think the three-phased approach in there is the best phase. Having attended so many meetings and seen what other cities have done on this issue, that a logical time frame is set up whereby the things are done with enough time. I realize how slow city government can be at times, and to quote what Julia Butcher said yesterday, I guess with the city it seems like dog years. And therefore I realize that this 2-year time period is an important time, and that you must do it right and get it right the first time. Having followed things at the federal level, where with the government policy, I think, and Reform Act from 1993, the executive departments are still making changes to the Code of Federal Regulations, having to go through all that. So I realize how slow a process this can be. Finally, I realize that over the next few weeks that there's still a considerable amount of work to be done to make all the appropriate technical corrections, but I'm confident in the work of particularly Chairman Kiefer and Chairman Chemerinsky, that they will work out all the necessary technical corrections, and that what is actually delivered to you for your approval by March the 15th will be, March the 5th, excuse me, will be an appropriate and successful, I think, document. And I strongly urge that you support the document that's finally given to you without making any really substantive changes to it, and I hope that the electorate of the city actually approves this on June the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. John Mack, and then Marvin Browdy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, President Ferraro and members of the City Council. I'm John Mack, President of the Los Angeles Urban League, and also co-chairperson of the African American Jewish Leadership Connection, and here in both capacities this morning, and several of my colleagues from the African American Jewish Leadership Connection are here with me. We're here to strongly urge the City Council to support the proposed unified charter which is being presented to you. We too would like to commend George Kiefer, Rafe Sonnenschein, and all of the members of the appointed Charter Commission, as well as Irvin Chemerinsky and members of the elected charter. This has been a long and difficult path, filled with many landmines, as I'm sure you know. Throughout this process, one of the very encouraging things to us is that there has developed a very broad consensus throughout this city of support, first of all, for change, the recognition that our charter is way out of date, that it needs to be updated significantly, and we think that the proposal before you really does that job due to the visionary leadership. It is both visionary yet practical. We think it is really potentially the constitution that our city will need to have in order to enable future elected city councils, mayors, both elected and appointed officials of various types to lead this city, and at the same time make sure that there is significantly expanded citizen participation in their government. We think there's another important thing in addition to the legal aspect of this charter and what it represents, but as being the kind of organization that we are, sharing a deep commitment to equal opportunity, to justice for all individuals without regard to race, religion, gender, income, or geographic location. We think that this process of charter reform affords us an opportunity to really bring our city together in some ways that it has not come together within recent years. All of us are very mindful of many difficult, polarizing events that we've faced, but we think that this charter reform proposal and the effort, if you support it, and we urge you to support it without any major changes, but we think that all of us can work together, whether it be civic groups, civil rights groups, business groups, labor groups, and of course those of you who are elected officials, that we can come together and create a very, very significant and major new charter for our city, and at the same time come together as one Los Angeles. We urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, John Mack. We appreciate your interest and hard work. Marvin Browdy and then Jose Andrade. Marvin Browdy sounds familiar name.
I have spent a great deal of time and effort following very closely the deliberations of the two commissions, and I have never seen a more thorough attempt to review the very fundamentals of what you've been doing here in the City Council. And that contribution is a very, very significant one, and is a credit to not only to you, but to the people of the city, that we've been able to bring forth the kind of wisdom and competence and professionalism that this united charter demonstrates. For me, the two key issues are participation and accountability, and the accomplishment has been very substantial. In participation, it has gone beyond what I could have hoped for in terms of a big, major step forward. This is not a little step, it is a big step. Had we done this 20 years ago, this would have been a different city. But it is not too late, and we have come a long way during the last 20 years, and now we are ready, and this is the big step that is going to become renowned for this particular charter. The other question is accountability. We all know how everyone wants to point the finger here and there. This is going to clarify a great deal, and it's going to give courage and reassurance to our citizenry. On the merits, the neighborhood councils are the linchpin of holding the whole system together, and the accountability will do that also. Now, I don't want you to become enmeshed with the naysayers, nor fearful of the naysayers. There will be some naysayers. But remember, we're going to get an overwhelming majority of the people of our city approving this charter. And I want to credit the elected commission and the appointed commission for their ability to work together. They've demonstrated a kind of civility and understanding and cooperation that is a credit to you and to our city. I urge you to adopt the unified charter. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin. Jose Andrade and Dr. Jorge Macias.
My name is Jose Andrade. Good morning, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. I, for one, endorse any new charter proposal that will make the public, business, and industry feel better or more comfortable about government and the services that they provide to us. However, appearances can be very deceiving. The public facade and substance are at issue. Accountability, I feel, does not exist. I, for one, will not applaud you for ostensibly trying to solve problems that you create. And the problem with our political leadership, that is to say the power brokers and government, is that by and large, the micromanaged imperatives and intentions under which they act are at variance with public service, integrity, propriety, and even morality. It's one continuing scam, it seems. One facet, the currency of exchange, are recreational activities that do not appear anywhere or on anyone's job description, to use the governmental term for work responsibilities. In sum, we need a political and governmental purging that removes all these people that initiate bad and improper actions, bad intentions, bad purpose, and bad results that are never good or cost-effective to the public to address what we receive. Specifics are not needed here. You as a group know what I'm speaking about. Some of you I respect, and my comments are not meant as an all-inclusive condemnation of all, but if the shoe fits, wear it. And one last comment. In some ways, politics and government have come to resemble an old-fashioned roller derby. Whatever happened to the ideals and purity of real and truthful public service? Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Jorge Macias, and then Charles Franklin.
Good morning, council members. I'm Dr. Jorge Mancillas. I'm the Southern California Political Director for SEIU. We represent 180,000 members who live in Los Angeles. The question that voters will be asked to address in June is a fundamental one. How should the second largest city and the wealthiest and most powerful nation in the world be governed? And the question is posed after a decade in which we faced tremendous turmoil and which our city has been fractured, and at the same time when our city, as we enter a new millennium, faces tremendous opportunity to tap the human potential that has converged in this city that we call home. Whatever answer our city gives to this question will transcend throughout the nation, and in some sense throughout some of the other nations where people have come to make Los Angeles home. But it also matters to each and every one of us, because Los Angeles is our home. It's where our families live. It's where our children go to school. It's where we work, where we rest, and where we try to tap our artistic and creative potential. Over 18 months, many of us have participated in the public debates of the two commissions and the public hearings. There are a number of issues in which we provided commentary, written and oral testimony, issues having to do with the administration of the city's departments, issues having to do with the election of the officers of the city. But two issues stood out as a key for us to address the tension and confrontation, the polarization that has led to many in our city feeling alienated and neglected and taking the road of exploring secession, of erecting gated communities or immigrating out of our city, whether they're individual citizens or businesses. And those issues are the need for increased participation, direct increased participation by citizens, as well as increasing the checks and balances and accountabilities of public bodies. We presented some proposals. We formed an alliance with other unions and associations representing people who work for the city. We formed an alliance that nobody expected with business groups, with resident groups, with homeowner groups. We had an opinion on these issues. The current unified proposal doesn't contain everything we wanted, and it contains some things we thought were necessary, but it's a good package. And the most important thing is that it builds consensus. What it became clear over the last 18 months is that we cannot move forward in improving the government of this city without consensus. No matter how good the proposal is, it will not work if it further polarizes us. That's why we have come to the recommendation to you that you approve the unified charter, and that because you have a reservoir of experience, because you have the duty to represent your constituents, if you feel the need to make proposals that will in any way expand and improve the package before you, that you keep as a prime consideration the need to move forward, building consensus amongst all the constituent groups, all the groups and citizens and residents of this city. This city has adopted a slogan, "Together we are the best LA." The best charter for the city of LA is the one that keeps us and moves us forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Macias. Charles Franklin, followed by Cindy O'Connor.
Good morning. My name is Charles Franklin. I'm a member of the Executive Board of the Los Angeles chapter of the American Jewish Committee, and I'm here today to support the Unified Charter. The American Jewish Committee was established in 1906 and is the oldest human relations organization in the United States. It has been actively working to improve relations among groups in our city since 1945, when our chapter was inaugurated. We now have over 1,600 members. The issue of charter reform has been of deep concern to the American Jewish Committee. The process has been extremely important. It has brought together diverse communities in Los Angeles. We were actively grappling with the issues surrounding charter reform even before the current explorations were taken up by the City Council and the Mayor. Beginning in 1993, we invited former Mayor Bradley to speak to us on the themes and consequences of charter reform. Subsequently, we had a session with Councilman Zev Yaroslavsky, who educated us on similar issues, and we have been engaged with the staffs of the two committees in working on the specifics of the Unified Charter. We have reviewed the Unified Charter and, as an organization, like the substance of it. While not every member of the American Jewish Committee endorses every proposal in this document, we are unified in the belief that this charter represents positive changes that will reform Los Angeles. We believe it will make government more responsive, more effective, and improve participation in all the communities in our city. It has long been part of the Jewish tradition to advocate and support reform efforts in the hope that these will bring us closer to the Jewish ideal of tikkun olam, or repairing the world. As such, we urge the City Council to support this Unified Charter. We also wish you to offer our assistance in any way we can, both within the Jewish community and in the community at large, to promote the passage of this document. Again, we support the Unified Charter and ask you to pass it so that the city can move on more productively. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. Cindy O'Connor, followed by Brian Hutchings.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving us all this time to appear before you today. I'm Cindy O'Connor, and I'm First Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles. I also am the spokesperson for the Civic Coalition, which is a coalition of nonprofit groups that have come together in order to encourage issues in charter reform that we think are really important to our interests. Commission, I'm sure you've heard from a number of members today already. You'll notice the green button I have on. The gentleman just before me also had the button on, and you'll see others today with that button. We're here, we're wearing our buttons to show our unity in our support for a unified charter, and to ask that you hold fast to the work that has been done already, and that you make every effort to see that the charter that has been presented to you today is the charter that we end up with, because we feel very strongly that one charter on the ballot is the way to a successful completion of this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Brian Hutchings, followed by Laval Lund.
Good morning, City Council. Okay, as you may know, I've been following the charter reform process for quite some time. You know, kind of the sausage-making process and the involvement of the RAND Corporation and Michael Milken et al. And I am not saying just because of that, that this is a replay of the RAND Corporation's Big Mac policy in '75 in New York, which was quite an undertaking and it was very controversial at the time, but I would still like people to check out the report on that, the case study on that, which is the November 17th issue of the New Federalist newspaper. There's a two-page, full-page article on that. Let me hold this up. But let's get beyond, leaving aside Big Mac, because I'm not saying that RAND is up to their old tricks. Leaving aside Big Mac, charter reform, of course, it's still, as you all do when you're installed as officers, still has to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And unfortunately, right now, what's going on, I've been trying at my city council and here to get especially the Democrats or the former Democrats to do something about this ridiculous coup. It's a coup, and I can prove that. I've got newspapers here. That's the same newspaper. This is, well, it really talks about Al Gore, how Al Gore is one of the people behind this so-called process, along with the bushwhackers like Ken Starr and Linda Tripp et al.
Can we stick to the charter, please?
Well, yeah, I'm trying. I would like to see somebody do something. There's about one more day that you can actually do something to put in some kind of word either for or against this process. Now, I think you know what the right thing to do is. These people are going crazy, and they're the same people that were behind the Big Mac policy. That is why it is so relevant. The Big Mac policy has the same backers as this coup against the President of the United States, which is Gore is in on it.
Mr. Hutchins, please, we're talking about our charter, not Santa Monica's charter, or not the federal government. So please, thank you very much, and we have Laval Lund next.
Laval Lund, a member of the Board of Directors of the Water and Power Associates Incorporated, a nonprofit, private, independent organization interested in water and energy issues for Los Angeles. The associates appreciate the work of the two staffs of the charter commissions and the work they have done to develop this unified city charter. I think that one of the things that it was concern of the public that there were two charter commissions addressing the same issue. I think that actually has turned out for the better. The two charter commissions have gone about it in a different manner and have come together and have developed this unified charter. So we thank those for doing that. The Water and Power Associates support the unified charter and urge you as a part of the City Council to support that and place it on the ballot for June. Thank you.
Thank you, Laval. Jenny Jeffy.
Jerry Jeffy, representing the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. In an oft-repeated quote, Winston Churchill said, "Anyone who has respect for law or sausage ought not to watch either being made." And in so many respects, the charter reform process reflects Los Angeles government itself, often fragmented, confusing, contradictory, and contentious. Yet progress has been made. Somehow, the process has worked. We have a charter reform proposal that we can enthusiastically endorse. We must now educate the city's business community about the importance of supporting this measure when it appears on the June ballot. A solid business support for the compromise measure will help ensure Los Angeles has a system of government and administration that reflects our position as the world's most influential, diverse, and dynamic city heading into the new millennium. Thank you.
Okay, that's all the cards we have, so the public hearing, we're going to continue the public hearing on the charter every day in the council meeting, so anybody that wants to come that hasn't been heard already. And we hope that just the people of Los Angeles will comment about our charter and not Santa Monica or elsewhere. Okay, I wanted to ask, we talked about 700-page charter that we have now. Now, how many of these pages are you going to eliminate? Because we got 600 and some between these two books that you sent us.
Oh, I think that you should be down to know. In Volume 1 is approximately 150 pages, and in Volume 2 is how much? It's about 100 and...
The whole thing runs about 330, of which, about 110 is the fire and police pension system. You may also be looking at the red line version, which provides the detailed changes from the existing charter, and that document is going to be substantially longer, but that's a document for your study and review.
We did not, Mr. President, measure our success by how short we made it, although we did, I think, manage to reduce its size by about 50% in terms of the government section.
Okay. Did you want to be heard? Okay. Mr. Bernson, you want to be heard.
Well, first of all, I want to thank both commissions for their efforts. I think they put in a lot of time. They're to be thanked, whether we agree, disagree, or whatever. But we want to recognize their efforts in putting in this. I have one very serious question. As somebody who advocated neighborhood councils and established them 20 years ago, and still have them in my district, the current plan under this revision would be to have a Department of Neighborhood Empowerment that would select these councils. Now, is this going to be one department? We're talking about 5 planning commissions. How are we going to select these people from the community? Is this going to be selected through the mayor's office? Who's going to appoint the Department of Empowerment? Are we going to lose the ability to appoint people in the community that we know are activists and people that are involved individually as we do now in our own council districts? Maybe you can explain that to me, because that's one of the cornerstones, I think, and one of the reasons I ran. When I first ran, I ran with the intention, and I publicly said that I would establish these councils. And they've worked very well for me. They're not politicized, they're not elected. These people do their job, and many of them are as professional or more than some of our regular commissioners. I hate to say that, but it's true. But how will that change under this Department of Governance? I mean, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. I mean, how's the selection going to be made? Who's going to select the people who are in the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment? Is it going to be the mayor? I mean, how's this going to work? I think this is a very big question, because this may, in fact, if it really isn't going to be defined where we have actual input from the immediate neighborhood, and it's done downtown someplace or something of that nature, we may lose rather than gain the ability for public accountability. I'd like an explanation on that.
Well, I'd like both Rafe and Mary to jump in on this as well, but the concept is as follows, that you will create the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment through an ordinance. That only requirement is that, like other departments, it have commissioners who are attached to that department. It's a non-managing commission, 7 members who are appointed as other commissioners are appointed by
the mayor. Is that right?
By the mayor. The department itself is a department of the government and is required under the charter to present to you a plan for implementing the system of neighborhood councils, including what kinds of criteria they would use for recognizing neighborhoods. The neighborhoods themselves are self-selected under the, they're not selected by the mayor or the department, they are self-selected
Well, how is that going to happen?
pursuant to the plan that you will be in charge of approving. Will set forth how that will take place. One of the things we wanted to do in this, by mandating the system, what we wanted to do is still retain in the government, meaning the council and the mayor through ordinance, the ability to adopt
So
the
the
procedures.
council could adopt by ordinance a system which I have had in place, for example, that the council office would appoint.
As long as it's consistent with the provisions of the charter, and we ought to point out what those are. Ray, if you want to.
The system of self-selection would allow the neighborhood councils, as they apply for certification, to propose the manner in which the officers and members would be selected. They could choose to apply under a system where they are appointed by the council, but this would not allow, I mean, quite bluntly, this would not allow a system to be imposed of strict appointment by the council, but it would not rule out that neighborhood councils would choose that method. They could also choose other methods of selection. They could choose
Who would this be, the commission of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment would choose the method?
No, but they would have to approve that the method met
So in
certain-
other words, a commission that's appointed by the mayor would then be approving the system in which the selection is made in the neighborhoods. Well, to me, that's a step backwards. I hate to tell you that.
Check. You can use your crutch if you want.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to get right to the questions, and please know that the praise and thanks are implicit, and I've said them to you personally, all of you that have been involved. The statement about looking to retain what works and then to fix what doesn't, and I think that's very clear in what you have been recommending, but I would like to hear you apply that to I guess it's section 112, the whole issue of changing the city administrative officer, creating an Office of Research and Administrative Services.
Yes.
And then a second question, and I'm not sure I can easily find it, but there's a section that talks about, I think, council members, if the council wants information from the Office of Research and Administrative Services, that the council has to request it. I have the impression that if an individual council member, in researching, doing a motion, or wanting to come up with a solution to something, that we don't have easy access to information as we do now from the Chief Administrative Office that is very, very helpful to the council. So those are two, well, it's really, my focus is on those recommended changes.
All right, first of all, with respect to the CAO, which has a new name, the name is expected to more accurately describe what the CAO already does. There are many people who thought the CAO, when they hear the name, is an executive officer of the city with line authority to direct the government, and as we have come to understand, that is not the case. The function of the CAO will remain largely unchanged as an independent authority, and probably it's a linchpin of what I referred to earlier as maintaining the professional government in Los Angeles. There are some exceptions with respect to that. Currently, the CAO approves transfers up to $25,000, I think the number is, that are made between departments or within a department in different programs. That authority is set by now, under the new charter proposed, by ordinance by you, but the authority is given to the mayor as an executive line officer to make those transfers. So in other words, in that area, the CAO does not transfer the money up to a certain point. There are maybe one or two other minor exceptions, but otherwise the CAO remains an independent source of budget information and other information that assists the council and the mayor, and in a sense a neutral source. With respect, so that maintains that position, and it's a fundamental part of the charter on maintaining the professional government in Los Angeles. With respect to the calling on the CAO, the decision was made by the commission and both commissions together that the city council has available to it as individuals, not only its own staff, but the staff of the CLA, to answer particular questions. And that if the CAO is going to continue to get individual questions from individual council and individual assignments, that is in essence a burden on the CAO that ought to more properly undertaken by the CLA, and that the CLA needs to address the CAO with questions to get those. But otherwise, the questions should come through committees by votes and directions to the CAO, or by the council as a whole acting as a body. That it's the council or the committees that are requesting the assistance or the report and so forth, not the individual council people. It's more formal, and frankly, it does preclude a council member from calling the CAO and saying, I want a 50-page report on this item, and that I want it, by Thursday.
Any council member who asks for a 50-page report should be punished.
Yeah, we only go to 45 pages. Yeah. One paragraph. Mr. Holden.
First of all, Mr. President, I want to commend the commission, both of them, and the amount of work they put into this effort is clearly indicate that you've been on the job 25 hours a day for the length of time you've been serving. But I must tell you this, that I review my duty, and maybe the other members of the council should also, that we know where the pitfalls are. We know where the loopholes are, because we have served as elected officials. Now, let me just tell you that you have said that BZA, for an example, they don't hear their matters within the time prescribed by ordinance. And you got that in the book. And therefore, you're eliminating BZA. Interim control ordinances, I don't see any provisions for that. Then, when you start drawing the boundaries for the councils or for the assembly, for the Senate, you have to look at contiguous, if they're contiguous, community of interest. There's no discussion regarding when you draw area council about community of interest if you're just going to do 5 area councils. 5 area commissions. There's no community of interest. There's nothing, West LA, there's nothing in common with South Central or San Pedro. And when you start putting that together, you're going to have a problem. Where those persons who don't want any more development in their area, say in the west part, where you have over-concentration development now, and we need it and been entitled to it for years in our area, just won't get it based on how they vote. Or for an example, they decide they want more in their area, they'll outvote you in your area, down-zone your area, and give it to their area. If you're going to tell me that politics won't play a role here, then you got another thought coming, because it will, in what you're representing to us. And I'm glad you're still negotiating, because we want to iron out these loopholes. And I'll give you an example. When we had some auto body shops just inundated in the 10th district, I came up with an interim control ordinance to freeze the permitting of any additional auto body shop until such time that we can draft an ordinance control setting up conditional use permit where you have to have a public input. And that's what you're really talking about. We had public input that says, okay, no more, and if you come in, you come in under these conditions. Okay, zoning appeal. I had an interim control ordinance that says you can't rip down any more single-family homes and destroy the neighborhood to bring in the multiple units. And it was vetoed, and some members not sitting in this audience would not vote to override the mayor's veto and allow those homes to be knocked down. There's no provision for that when you bring in the ideas of one community versus the ideas of another community, and you only have 5 areas. Now, I'm going to tell you, they didn't override the mayor's veto. We only got 10 votes. We needed 12. And that neighborhood all virtually disappeared by cause of special interest of some of the members of the council at that time. And those who's in the room hear what I'm talking about. You're correcting some problems, but you're doing a good job at it. I can see some of the things you recommended are outstanding, should have been thought of a long time ago, but then, of course, I see some problems that's being created. Simply, the city attorney, right now, they can sell a case up to $25,000. I don't think you should change that. The mayor's not involved in that. He's not going to get involved in it. He's going to appoint a staff person to say, shall that settlement be consummated? It's not making the matters better, it's making the matters worse. So My time is up, but I'm going to write up a little critique, sit down with you, not in public, and say what we might be able to do to say what really happens. This is the real world, what really happens, rather than the imaginary one. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Ms. Sikowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, want to congratulate all the people who participated in this. And, in fact, I asked a member of your staff if you could submit to me, and I think all members of the council might like to see it, the slides that you used in your presentation, because the basic outline we received, but the additional information as it was set forth in the slides as you presented it to us, I think would be useful for us to give to other community groups who are interested in it. It's a really nice educational study guide, I think, to give people the information about what and how you attempted to organize this. My questions really revolve around two different areas, some of which have been touched on. First, I'd like to see if you could address the issue of the new Office of Research and Administration, which is the equivalent of our current CAO, better spelled out from your perspective. And then you're creating a Director of Finance. In many ways, I think those of us here perceive the CAO, or the new equivalent of Office of Research and Administrative Offices, as our Director of Finance. So I would like a clarification from you as to where there is either not conflict or how those two would work in partnership. And as you've created the Office of Research and Administration to be the current CAO, or whoever would be holding a CAO position to move into that position, I would have thought that perhaps the CAO would have moved into the Director of Finance position. So I need some clarification of understanding that distinction. And then both in terms of some of the answers to your the questions that have been provided, my understanding is that the Office of Neighborhood Empowerment and the creation of neighborhood councils allows the council with the Office of Neighborhood Empowerment and that commission, as you say, to create the plan, and that part of that plan will have some guidelines and some thresholds that ensure that all stakeholders in a neighborhood get to be a part of a neighborhood council, but don't necessarily create a rigid structure, nor even in a plan require that the same rigid structure apply across the board to each neighborhood council. And I would like, one, your confirmation of that, and then two, the one thing that I didn't see in here, and I presume will later be created by the Office of Neighborhood Councils and/or Empowerment and the City Council itself, is the jurisdictional, geographic array of potential neighborhood councils. We have some areas of the city which are very motivated to become organized, whether it's on a block basis, whether it's in a subsect of a neighborhood, and we have others that are much larger in terms of how they would come together. And I would be concerned that there not be a preponderance of multiple neighborhood councils of a smaller size in some areas of the city and perhaps not the others. So how would the structure, as you envision it, of the neighborhood council assure equality and access, and not just promulgating more of the same, where we have very heavily, actively organized communities in some areas and a dearth of them in others? So if you could answer, it's a lot of questions.
Councilwoman, let me take a shot at that, and I'd ask again Rafe and Mary to add to it. Your description of how the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment would work is correct. It would be creating a plan that would be approved or modified by the council, so they would do that together. That is exactly right. We did not want to set any particular limits or minimums with respect to the size of the neighborhoods. They vary so much in Los Angeles that to do that we thought was presumptive on our part. That the neighborhoods themselves tend to define themselves in the city. What we did want to protect, though, was people being left out. So there is a prescription with respect to the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment that it makes an effort to make sure that an area is not left out of a process by being between two neighborhoods that are active. Now, the specific regulations with respect to that or practices are, again, be part of the plan that you would be approving. So that would come to you with respect to the geographic size of these. But some of the areas, as we know, in your community, Brentwood versus Van Nuys in size, are very, very different. And so we thought that would be something that could be developed. With respect, and Rafe, do you want to comment on that in a minute? With respect to the Office of Research and Administrative Services and Director of Finance, the Director of Finance is going to be responsible for the collection of taxes. And so that's a shift there. And there may be developments over time where you may want to, through ordinance, begin to shift some of the functions, if you'd so choose, from the CAO now to the Department of Finance. That is left to this government, however, by ordinance, if there was something you were going to do in that regard. We begin with the Department of Finance being fundamentally involved with a collection of revenues. There are other assignments that are there, but that's principally there. And seeing that as an extension of the executive branch. But this function of an independent source of information that reports both to you and to the mayor, we thought was fundamental to keep intact. That we did not want to disrupt that was an inherent part of Los Angeles government that we ought to keep together. It doesn't mean that that department might not develop in some way over time to take on more functions that you would think would be appropriate. But I think that different mayors and different councils may have different views about that office, and the charter ought not restrict it too much, except for protecting the independent nature of that CAO position.
If I could just add, I think... I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's, again, the distinction between line management and the research and administration. There were two different problems being solved. There had been a lot of information brought to us about the scattering of the line function in the financial management of the city and how important it was to begin a process of rationalizing that through an Office of Finance, but not to have, as George said, the CAO's office playing that line function more. But so one thing to preserve the research function of the CAO, but to expand the possibility of a more unified financial line and administrative function.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yeah, two concepts that I want to deal with. In dealing with neighborhood councils and their advisory capacity, but their authority, I want to give you an example, because I think that when you talk about the reapportionment commissions and their authority, we have a situation in the city of LA, and I'll use as an example because it happens throughout the downtown area, the Convention Center, New Sports Arena. The census tract in which it lies, the people who live in that census tract live in Pico Union. And we have created a situation where we call the downtown skyline, the downtown civic center, Central City, which is made up with not a lot of residents. It's made up of economic interest and so forth. But the residents live, for example, east of the freeway and west of the freeway, but not necessarily in those boundaries. And we've had situations where what's in the best interest of the people who live there might not be in the best interest of the whole regional decision. How do you propose we will empower those people to be part of the stakeholders and the decision-making? Because that's a concern I've had to face in a district that basically was forced to be created by the courts. And I have pockets of people like that throughout my district. When we talk about the Westlake community, Temple Beaudry community, and the fact that regional projects have been coming in because of regional necessity and basically excluded from participation those local communities. And I see that as very much an issue that has to be dealt with, because I think those communities should have a voice. But they're going to be bucking heads with what happens west of a freeway that has nothing to do with people, but rather with an economy. That was one question I'd just like to have addressed in the context of reapportionment, in the context of neighborhood advisory groups. The second question is, when we talk about the Department of Finance and its role as collectors and issuance of permits and so forth, we as a city have been dealing a lot with tax credits, tax increment projects, in trying to stimulate economies. And who would be responsible for that analysis, knowing that we don't have, at this time, a Department of Economic Development? I would assume you'd say the Office of Research might be doing that, or would it actually be coming from the Office of Finance? Because it talks about developing policy, financial policies for the city.
All right, let me take a shot at both of those. With respect to the neighborhood councils, one of the requirements for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and their plan, and the charter requires this, that it assists areas like that area and others that have been underrepresented in forming their neighborhood council and giving them the resources to represent themselves. So we recognize there are going to be areas of this city that are going to be very comfortable falling into a same practice of being able to organize and represent themselves and be heard. We also recognize that part of this task is to make sure that other areas that have not been as easily organized, do not have the tools, and maybe don't have the resources, are given the resources and assistance. Some of the changes that Councilman Wax referred to happening yesterday in our conference committee was to add some requirements for training, availability, and other resources, office space, and so forth, for the neighborhood councils to affect themselves, to bring themselves into existence, to help organize themselves, and then have a voice. So I think that's a fundamental way that I think will improve representation from parts of the city that have not been as well represented. Also, this requires that it not be just homeowners in an area, but all residents in the area, and including small businesses and employees that live in that area, provide that community. And that gives a better force to certain areas of the city that have not been represented by strong homeowner groups operating. With respect to the CAO, I'm not sure I understood the question completely, Councilman, but I think that requests for information, studies, how things might be done better, could be made from this council or any of the committees to the successor to the CAO. The mayor's office would also, though, have an obligation as the executive managing branch of the government to develop these things, and through their own offices and departments in the city suggest ways about doing it. So they could do their own studies certainly as well. But this council could direct its own legislative staff, but also the CAO to come back with recommendations and studies on what might be done. That would be within your authority. Mary, do you want to add to that?
I wanted to add one point on the neighborhood council issue. Can you get her mic on? On the neighborhood council issue, the charter will require that an early warning system be developed as part of the plan so that neighborhood councils will receive notice of decisions that are going to be made that will affect their area. And that would not be limited just to decisions that are being made about things that are occurring actually within their area, but citywide issues as well that could affect that neighborhood or the residents. And in that way, they'll have an opportunity to give their input before that decision is made.
Ms. Goldberg.
Yes, thank you. From my point of view, the key issues really aren't mayor versus council or any of those others. They are really about making sure that the public knows what we're doing and preventing a city that has been highlighted by a remarkable lack of graft and corruption to keep it that way. I see some possible dangers in your work in both of those categories. First of all, executive orders, are they to be made public? Are executive orders to be made public?
It's a good question, Council. It's not addressed in the charter.
Well, see, now you could change dramatically how each department does by executive orders without anyone, including the council, ever knowing about it. For example, you see, the difference between the mayor and the council is the Brown Act doesn't affect the mayor. It's one person. So everything that you give to the mayor, if you do not require a public reporting throughout the entire document, will not be reported. By some mayors. Other mayors will have press conferences. But if you're talking about making sure the public knows in its right-to-know function, that's right. Well, there'll be, in the next 100 years, a lot of them. So the question is, how does the public know? And I would ask you to look at every provision where the mayor can act or acts alone or acts primarily alone unless vetoed, and make sure that there's some kind of public access to that information. That's number one. Easy public access, required public access. That's number one. Number two, we got some problems, I think, already with limiting, allowing one person, here again, the mayor, because that's the only one-person position, to deal with a certain amount of money that can be specified, certain amount of money that can be transferred, not to exceed certain limits, okay? The problem with that right now in the existing system is not in the mayor's office, but in some departments who choose to stay under that limit and then do multiple contracts. How do you prevent a mayor from doing that or other departments from doing that and completely circumventing any limits the council has on it?
That limit and also any other restrictions on that are set by ordinance.
No, but the problem is multiple contracts. I have a $75,000 thing I want done, so I break it into three $25,000 parts and nobody ever has to know who I give it to.
Again, whatever that limit is, whether it be $1 or $25,000 or $50,000, is up to the council to set by ordinance. Currently, you have a practice, and I think it's an ordinance, that the CAO has that authority.
I know. That's what I'm referring to. It's not the mayor's office, it's any one office.
Well, that, and I think throughout, and I think it's consistent throughout the rest of the proposed charter, is that much is left to you by ordinance to set restrictions and parameters around. Rather than put the number in the charter with no restrictions, which would imply perhaps no restrictions, this sets the number and the restrictions to be set by ordinance.
One of the things, again, you might want to do is to have anybody who has ability to transfer money under this ordinance required to send to the appropriate committee notice that they have made the transfers. Then you could catch them if they're doing multiple contracts to avoid the numbers. In other words, the key is information. And since there's no information requirement on single office areas, like the mayor, the city attorney, they have no Brown Act requirements. Anything that you do not require them to tell somebody else about, we'll never know about. That's the truth. That's how it works. Okay, next question. Under the Department of Airports, you now say that notice is required, this is section 606, for franchise, actually this is powers not just airports, this is general powers to proprietary departments, for franchises, permits, and leases. It says that whenever a board takes an action to approve such a franchise or permit, it should give us notice. That obviously means that we're not involved in it. But then it says on the next page, 122-607, the term shall not exceed 30 years. Right now, we limit how long those franchises and leases and permits can be to a much smaller amount of time without council approval because we're anxious that we don't de facto sell off these for long periods of time, yet the next one not only gives them 30 years, but right below that it says the council by a vote, however, could raise that to 50 years. Well, that's a very long time for something as important as a major lease at the airport or the harbor. And what are we doing here, folks? We're increasing the length of these to at times. These are the things, these are the lucrative contracts where every suit of every lobbyist in the entire world comes and lobbies everybody. And now you're going to give them a franchise or a license or a lease for 30 years, up to 50 years? This, to me, is an opportunity for vast mischief. And I do not think it's appropriate for the council to go that long or anybody to go that long. And I hope you'll look at it. Before I go on, though, I have a bunch of these because they're little things in the language, but they're big in their practical consequences. I would like to request, and if I can get a second, if I need a motion, I will move it, that the CAO and the CLA go through these documents and not just tell us where the changes are, I appreciate their first chart, but give us an honest and non-bashful account of areas where there may be opportunities for mischief and for difficulties, both the positives and the negatives that are in this document.
Second.
Because I think it's important, you don't want that to happen by inadvertence, so we have a small window of time, we need to get this information. I've just gone through and marked a few, and I'll yield because I know other people have questions. But I do think we need to be very careful about those two things, public access to information and areas where we are opening the door of a very clean city to practices that have caused trouble in many other cities. And those are the two major concerns I have, and I hope that we will get the CAO and the CLA's response as to the positives and the negatives of this document in a very candid fashion. Oh, and cost, yes, that would be helpful as well. I have a motion on that one.
Mrs. Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me thank Dr. Sonnenschein and Mr. Kiefer for your outstanding work on this. You've made efforts to keep members informed of what you were doing and how you were approaching it, and I want to compliment you on the well-organized approach that you've taken to accomplishing your work. I spoke to you at a point in your deliberations about the differences between patronage-type cities and cities like Los Angeles that were never under that kind of civic organization, and the superior organization that I felt that Los Angeles had as opposed to some of the patronage cities, and what my feeling was about patronage cities where it could lead. There are several questions that I have, and I don't expect that I'll get to ask them all with one question, but there are some I'll try within my time limits. You identified the CAO as the current CAO. You would have him Director of Organization and Research, and also an Executive Budget Office. And on the summary on page 2 in section 232, where you authorize an executive budget within the mayor's office, you say which assists the mayor in preparing and submitting the budget document. And then you go further down and say under section 291, the director of ORAS also assists in the preparation of the annual budget in accordance with policies prescribed by the mayor. It is very dysfunctional, it seems to me, for policies to be inserted, new policies to be inserted in the budget document without ever having seen the light of day before. And we've had instances where that has happened, where vast areas were redone through the budgeting process without any notification that a policy change was even needed, let alone discussion among the council about such a policy change or voting on it. It seems to me that the CAO should be the driver of this, because the Executive Budget Office is going to quite naturally respond to the needs of whatever mayor there is. The CAO we look to for independent information and independent analysis of powers, of policies and what have you, and particularly the money. You can't balance budgets on funny numbers, and you can't balance budgets that are loaded with policy changes. I'd also have a question on, and in that context of CAO and Executive Budget Office, toward the end of your presentation, Dr. Sonnenschein, you had enumerated some offices that would participate, and the ORAS office was left out, but the Executive Budget Office was in, and that was a concern, and now I didn't write it down at the time, the exact location of that. The other concern, or one other concern, is the mayor in control of legislation. Just like the question that Ms. Goldberg raised with respect to executive orders, the mayor could support, whomever he or she might be, could support legislation for which there was no support on the council. And the council would never know that the mayor was doing that. In other instances, where a mayor needs to take a position on something vital to the city, such as keeping it together rather than splitting it apart, if the mayor was not so inclined, then nothing would get done. There would be no voice to speak to the legislators. So I have some, and the public wouldn't even know. I have some questions about that. On Public Works, you reference here about a general manager taking over the Board of Public Works. And then you say you recognize that the Board of Public Works is also there. Here, Section 581 places the Public Works Department under control and direction of the Board of Public Works. But Section 582 creates a director of Public Works appointed by the mayor who acts as Public Works General Manager. And I wanted to raise questions about that and to see if that's really what you meant, or is that duplicative functions, because the Board of Public Works currently sits as the manager of that department. And I noticed you dropped the city engineer out of, as I read through this, and I don't recall at the moment what you did with the city engineer, but you wiped him out. That was one of the office positions you got rid of. And I don't know who you proposed to, or what office you propose to do the work of the city engineer. That's a very vital function, and it's part of the Board of Public Works. The general...
why don't you press your button again?
Will do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Savornich. Did you want to answer any questions from Mrs. Waller's present?
I'll try to do some of the answers, and Rafe, if I miss some of these, follow up on. With respect to 291B, the powers and duties of the new CAO office, B is essentially the same language. It is the same language as in the current charter. So the mayor has always had the assistance of the CAO in preparing the budget. The council has had the assistance of the CAO in reviewing the budget. That has been troublesome to this particular mayor, because he thinks that the CAO ought to be reporting directly to him. It's one of the choices we made, that the CAO should remain in an independent position. At the same time, we want to give the mayor what budget staff he may think he needs within his office, because he has the authority under the current charter and under the proposed charter to prepare the budget and submit it to the council. So the view was that he ought to have a budget office in his office and ought to have those tools available to him. But that particular provision is the same as in the current charter, and that would persist as is currently the case. Now, a particular mayor over time may choose to a greater or lesser degree to depend on the CAO. Historically, the mayors have depended on CAOs a great deal. This mayor has wanted to have his own staff working closely with him on it, as well as the CAO. But this doesn't change that relationship or give particular additional authority of the mayor over the CAO in that area. With respect to the government relations function, Councilwoman, the mayor has to conduct that policy in conformance with city policy. He cannot do it opposed to what the city policy is, any more than he can do anything else in the government inconsistent. With the council taking a position, he cannot take a position on behalf of the city in opposition. In fact, there's some belief that this may require the mayor to be more in conformance with city policy and have to express when he is not speaking for the city, but only speaking as mayor if he has a different kind of view. But it has to be in conformance with city policy. With respect to the general manager issue, there will remain a managing board of the commission that sits on top of that department, the Board of Public Works. The general manager is appointed by the mayor, and is a position of coordination in our view that is going to be useful in the future for coordinating those bureaus under the direction of the managing commission. And with respect to the city engineer, I would leave that to Mary Strobel.
By taking the city engineer's position out of the charter, we're not intending to abolish that position or change any of the powers and duties. That's just a position that would remain under ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council, and I also would like to add my thanks and congratulations to the commission and the staff for their hard work. A couple things, knowing a little bit about, as a student of history, in regards to the reform movements of the earlier part of this century through the 1920s, leading up to the 1925 revision of this charter. One of the things that was done at that time, and I'm so pleased that the Charter Commission recognizes that the type of government that indeed we operate in the city of Los Angeles is the Western Reform type of government. And for better or for worse, the type of government that Los Angeles has lived with since 1925 has been identified as a quote-unquote strong council, weak mayor type of government. But I kind of find that as a misnomer, because for anyone who has taken a look on how Los Angeles operates, I think that's kind of an unfair characterization of how our government is. I would not think that for 20 years of his administration that anyone thought of Tom Bradley as being a quote-unquote weak mayor, by both his reputation among his council colleagues and the public at large, and the same for Mayor Reardon. If you take a look at the opinion polls out there, people do not think that Dick Reardon is a quote-unquote weak mayor. And so my question would be, as you started to put this charter together and some of the provisions, one of them is in regards to the transfer of some of the duties and functions from the council to the mayor. One of them that I would like to focus in on is Prop 5. Many years ago, it might have been 1989, maybe 1991, I forget which now, Prop 5 was put into place into which the city council could assert jurisdiction with 10 votes over the actions of a city commission, and then go ahead and assume the responsibilities by sitting as that commission for the process of working through the issue. Under the draft charter proposal that we had before us, you are limiting now that the council can, with a 2/3 vote, whether it be a 15-member council, whatever member council, go ahead and assert jurisdiction by Prop 5, but only for the purpose of veto, not for the purpose of usurping the powers of that board to make changes if those changes are felt warranted by the council. In fact, right now, we take 2 votes in regards to Prop 5. One is to bring the issue before us, and if the majority of the council feels that the issue is not meritorious and bring it before the council, it dies there. So we first vote to assume jurisdiction, and then we vote to go ahead and take any corrective action that we feel is appropriate. So Prop 5, in its present shape and form right now, is a 2-vote process right here in this council. So my question would be to you, George, and to staff, is that what problems did the commission feel were associated with Prop 5 right now, which caused you to make the changes in the draft unified charter what's before us? That's the first one. Number 2, what problems do you think in the future would be or could be avoided by changing this responsibility to a veto rather than the council sitting as that board? And 3, was it the feeling of the Charter Commission that Prop 5 was being overused or abused? And then finally, did the commission work through the possibility that this could create a more adversarial relationship between the council and boards, and that issues to which there was disagreement would turn into a ping pong game? Because if there was no resolution and the council went and vetoed, and then it went back to the commission, which I guess would be the process now, and they disagreed with the council, they'd kick it back to the council, we kick it back and forth, and there would never be a resolution to an issue to which we would have some grave disagreement. And so if you could walk through those 4 questions, I would appreciate it.
Wait, I'm going to let Rafe take the first shot at this one, and then I'll follow up as well.
The history of Prop 5 was something that we really all educated ourselves on, and there were many myths about Prop 5. One is that it was being used hundreds of times, which, as you know, is not correct. It's been used rather sparingly in the time that it's been in place. However, it was, I believe, seen by the Commission as a very valuable oversight tool. And in fact, when it was first brought up, there was a lot of testimony that it should be abolished completely. It was inappropriate for the council. But what really emerged was that a number of potentially bad decisions by city commissions were avoided because of the use of Prop 5 and perhaps on occasion even the threat of Prop 5. The two-step process was perceived quite positively, and a two-step process remains in the unified charter, in which first there's a decision to take up a matter, and then there's a decision on whether to veto it. I think the modification aspect of this came from the Commission's strong belief that this is an oversight tool, not a management tool, and that to the extent that the Council becomes the Commission and acts as the Commission, that is a step in the wrong direction that so far has perhaps, certainly you couldn't document terrible consequences. I agree with you on that, and we all do. But down the road, if one of the goals is to strengthen the oversight role of the Council and make certain that bad decisions are highlighted and stopped in their tracks, that struck the Commission as more than enough reason to retain Prop 5. But the goal of management authority not always being lodged in the Council in this manner, I think was persuasive in the other direction. George, you have any?
Well, I think that's correct. I think that this is certainly was a controversial issue, and there were arguments on both sides, both to remove Prop 5 completely, as it was for most of the history of this charter, or to maintain it completely. And I think that we concluded that we would prevent some of the perceptions of delay, some of the concerns about council being involved in management, as Rafe has said, and still protect the council's ability to step in where they saw a problem. And there are unique cases where there are problems. There aren't that many cases where there are problems, but this seemed to be a good balance.
I believe my time is either about to expire or has expired. So the one question that I do have is if the Commission felt that Prop 5 was not being overused or abused, and that indeed the spirit of council oversight and management was prevalent among the dialogue among commissioners, I still haven't heard a concise answer to why the commissioners felt that the council asserting jurisdiction over an issue, over a decision in a two-step process over a board of commissioners was a bad idea in regards to making it seem like that would be gridlock, where indeed if our only option is a veto over a commission, that indeed would lead to gridlock, because we only have 5 days to assert our jurisdiction or not. But if indeed we veto and the board disagrees, you will go back and forth between vetoes and disagreements with no resolution, and I just want to hear on how the Commission felt in regards to the gridlock indeed being maybe a veto versus the council being able to assume jurisdiction.
I think I go back to what Dr. Sonnenschein said about management involvement, that it was not perceived as an appropriate role to put the council in the place of the commission and making that decision, and that the check and balance that we are looking for in terms of oversight was met with the veto. Secondly, we did consider the possibility of a ping pong, and whether that would lead to gridlock. And our view was, from a practical point of view, that the veto itself would force the commission to work things out. We did not see that as something that would be likely to happen.
Mr. Wax?
I must say I'm really impressed. Obviously, I have lauded both commissions for the work they put in bringing the documents, but I think the real test of anyone is their ability to explain and defend their recommendations in the way that the three of you have done today. Because many of these recommendations aren't things, they weren't your proposals that any one individual here made. They were part of a process that came to something that people have presented, and your ability to articulate the rationale behind them, I think, is very, very impressive. It seems to me that our comments tend to fit into two categories. One is where there may be disagreement among members of council with the conclusions that the commissions have reached, where for example, should neighborhood councils be appointed by the council, or should they be self-selected by the people in the neighborhoods? Discussions which you've had, and you've come to a recommendation. The other, however, are things that you may not have contemplate it, like Ms. Goldberg's point, which I think was the most significant point of all that must be dealt with, is the openness, the publicness of an action by an elected official not subject to the Brown Act. And I would know that, I'm sure that if that's brought to your attention, that's something you would clearly want to deal with. So I guess what I'm only asking now, since I have been one who has maintained that the council really owes it to the public to put the unified charter of both commissions on the ballot and give them a chance, do you still have time not to necessarily go back and change your minds over things you've debated endlessly and may disagree with on, but to take up the things that have been brought up, for example, today that you didn't discuss, for example, like the point about the publicness of any executive order or anything like that, because I would hope that you still could do that. I mean, I want very much to not be the one who adds and subtracts and everything you do, what I agree, and I really believe the voters should have the chance to vote on your joint proposals, but I would like to make sure that before we do that, you've considered the things that you might not have considered, such as the point Ms. Goldberg raised on having executive orders and other actions be in public. So do you still have time for the two commissions to at least, not to change your mind on the things you've already concluded, but at least to take the things you haven't considered and add those yet to additional recommendations before we act on putting this on the ballot? And would you? I mean, I think it's important that you do that, even if it's more work, but I think it's critical.
The short answer to that is yes and yes. We would have time, and we would take that and make those changes. I think that Councilwoman Goldberg's comment, I think it had the three of us looking at each other and saying absolutely right, right comment. And it's not. This is not surprising to us because we undertook this task under the assumption that the final body to whom we were reporting was the City Council. So that is not something that we would disregard.
Mrs. Chick?
Yes, a comment and then a couple of more questions to throw into the mix, either that can be addressed today or that will be on your list of things to look at. To my colleagues, I just wanted to mention on the whole issue of neighborhood councils that your Government Efficiency Committee, chaired by Mr. Wax, with Mr. Ridley Thomas and myself, undertook during many hours of work on our parts personally and as a committee to come forward with a recommendation to council separate and apart and really in a way in advance as a precursor to charter reform to enact neighborhood councils and to form an office of neighborhoods to provide the very needed infrastructure that would be needed to form this network of neighborhood councils. And what we found was that the devil was in the details. And so I think that what the Commission has done is exactly how it does need to happen, is to move a very important, essential, good idea forward into implementation, to leave the details open, and to very much start with the Office of Neighborhoods and get kind of the professional help and lay the groundwork, and then involve the City Council in going forward in the very best way, because it is complex based on the size, diversity, et cetera, of our city. And part of the trick is, how do you do it citywide, and how do you do it in ways that are flexible enough to fit the diverse needs and nature of our different neighborhoods. The questions refer to Section 272 and 273. I would like either now or in the next discussion a list of the litigation that involves matters over which the Charter gives the Council and the Mayor responsibility, to have the responsibilities in that area clarified. And on Section 273, some discussion about the distinction you've made between litigation involving money and litigation not involving money. And, you know, how do we make that distinction? And I'm also curious why the Commission did make that distinction in terms of assigning jurisdiction over those things.
I'd like Mary Strobel to get into this a little bit, but one of the distinction was policy. To the extent that the litigation resulted in a settlement involving policy, it seemed to us that that necessarily involved the City Council automatically in that. That delegations of settlement authority with respect to money, also a policy question as to where you draw the line, is something that the Council could set on its own and delegate. So we have suggested that the council can set a level for settlement of purely monetary settlements and give the mayor authority to settle those if it chooses at a certain level, and that level be chosen by the council. A claims board be established to handle settlements of another variety, and then only the council being settling or improving settlements of another variety. But with respect to anything that would then get into policy, it ought to automatically come back to the council. I think that's an overview. But I do want to ask Mary Strobel to talk about this a little bit more.
On the question of what types of litigation would fall under the mayor's direction and what type under the council direction, this is an issue that we have been discussing with the city attorney's office. Some of the answers are more obvious than others. For example, a challenge to a city ordinance as being unlawful would be something, since an ordinance is how the council acts legislatively, the council would retain its role as the client in making decisions on that type of litigation.
But sometimes the two are mixed. I'm thinking, for instance, of, I think, a lawsuit involving our sewer service charge, which involves, I think, a policy issue and possible, monetary matters. In terms of a settlement.
Right. In terms of giving more specifics on how that kind of thing would be resolved, I really have two responses. One is that in anticipating that there would be some questions that arise with respect to how litigation is to be handled, we have put in the charter that this section is to be interpreted by the city attorney, and that ultimately the city attorney is going to be the one that makes that call on who he or she turns to make those client decisions. Although I do think it will be possible for us to develop some more specific examples for you to get more of a flavor for that. Since this is an exercise that the city attorney goes through now in deciding who to speak to as the client, I would like to spend some time with the city attorney and see if between our offices we could come up with some more specifics on that.
Council, let me try to add one more thing on that. You've pointed out two different issues. One is authority for settlement, which ultimately rests with this body through an ordinance process. And that mirrors what we've done in the charter a lot of places where we've turned it back over to you rather than placed the restriction in the charter itself. The second one is who acts as the client in the meantime. And we heard many complaints that no one is acting as the client in the meantime. The city attorney's response to that was very logical also, which was the city attorney goes to where the issue is in the government. If it's involving the Department of Transportation, he or she would talk to the Department of Transportation and get some direction as required. But every single piece of litigation decision with respect to how to conduct the litigation itself does not go back to the council, for instance. So what we tried to do here is indicate more in the charter where those responsibilities for representing the city as the client are, short of the settlement process, which again, as I say, comes back to this body to establish those guidelines.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask you, you talked about the increasing the size of the council. You'll have in the main charter 15, then you'll have 21 and 25. If the charter passes with 60% of the votes, say, and to increase it to 21 passes with 58%, and the 25 53%. What will take place?
If both of the amendments pass, either 21 or 25, it would be the amendment receiving the most votes would pass.
But if the charter gets more votes...
If the charter gets more votes than the amendment that passes, if the amendment would still apply, even if it gets a majority but less votes than the charter. And let me give you the analogy that we looked at in thinking about that. If we pass the charter in June and in November put on an amendment to increase it to 21 or increase it to 25, that amendment would carry with a simple majority. And therefore, since this is an issue that has been both commissions recommending consideration of expansion of the council, that the fairest way to put it on the ballot was to put it as a majority vote, happened to be on the same ballot So it's not happening in November, but to treat it as an amendment of that charter. And again, it only goes into effect if that charter passes. But that would be the reason for not requiring more votes than the main charter.
Mr. Fuhr.
Thank you. I actually wasn't going to ask many questions today. We spent a lot of time on these, but I have a couple now. First, with regard to the litigation questions that Ms. Chick was raising, it was my understanding, first, let me just say that almost every litigation matter implicates policy to some degree or another, just as some more explicit in some cases than in others. It was my understanding that the council could, for example, set the monetary threshold for unilateral mayoral discretion low enough that pretty much anything could come to the council. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
So if we were concerned that there was confusion about this issue and wanted to assure that there was at least the opportunity for input because almost every litigation matter implicates policy, we could say anything below $25,000 is in mayoral discretion and the balance is not. I mean, let's be clear now, for example, the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee has unilateral discretion, I think up to $100,000 to do things, and the council never sees those matters. This is indeed a complicated and confusing area, and some additional clarity, I think, is useful. But your point is that much of that clarity rests in our hands, which is, after all, I think, much of the point of the charter. You know, this is a charter we're expounding, maybe not a constitution in the same way that was referred to in Marbury versus Madison, but it is something similar to that. And I think leaving the details to us is in many respects a very good idea. On the point that Ms. Walters raised, which I think is an important one regarding the voice that speaks for the city on matters of policy at the state or federal levels or in the initiative process, as we just did yesterday, for example. My understanding, which I hope you will correct if it is wrong, is the charter says the mayor speaks for the city. The council always retains the opportunity to take a policy position on a piece of legislation. The mayor has the opportunity to veto that determination. The council retains the opportunity to override that veto. And the point is, at the end of that process, whatever is the policy that is agreed upon, that is the policy that the mayor needs to advocate. And your point, I think, George, was that in some ways this gets the mayor more in the mix. In fact, in some ways the charter would be directive to the mayor. If the council passes a position on a legislative matter and it withstands a veto, if there is to be even a veto at all, it is incumbent on the mayor to speak out on that point. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I think because I think that Ms. Walters' point is an important one, but I want to emphasize that under the draft that's before us, we retain the opportunity to participate in these matters as we always have. And in some ways the question is, in Sacramento, is it the CLA's office or the mayor who speaks for us? That's correct. And you know, with regard to the neighborhood councils issue, as a proponent of establishing neighborhood councils, and as a proponent of seeing neighborhood councils that reflect that diverse array of stakeholder perspective on every decision, rather than leaving it to a potentially narrow view to make that determination, and as somebody who thinks that I hope we see the day when that broad array of stakeholders has real power in decision making and not merely advisory power, I view this as an important step forward that again leaves to the council the opportunity and the ability to flesh out details and indeed grant more power down the road. Is that not true?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Fuhr. All right, members of council, going for the second round, I have Mr. Holden, Ms. Goldberg, Ms. Walters, Mr. Hernandez, Mr. Savornich, and Councilman Ms. Miskowski. Chair recognizes Councilman Holden.
Mr. Chairman and members, just to take off where Ms. Chick was commenting on the lawsuits, because of Proposition C, and we were using the money to resurface roads rather than transportation, and we didn't give all the information in the budget. The mayor submitted the budget to the council. We were sued. We adopted what the mayor submitted. There's a settlement for about $1 million or more, you know, which we signed off on. So it's more complicated than what's being presented to us today. When in reality, I think it's nice for the people to come down and say, support this charter proposal intact, but they have no idea the consequences of the action and how much chaos it could possibly cause. Even though you've done an excellent job, and we applaud you for it, this is a friendly audience. Now we can go ahead and approve this and then go to the press after it's approved when it's on the ballot and say all the things that's wrong with it. And then the press will scrutinize and say, that's right, let's hold this up and start all over again. But what we want to do, I think everybody here wants to get something on the ballot. There should be some changes made, but we want to make sure that we're not causing more problems than we have already, or creating more problems than we already have. That is that's the major issue as far as I can see it. In terms of, once again, of the community of interest, when you start talking the area commissions, not just councils, Fremont Park Place, Windsor Village, Leimert Park, the west part of my district, all in my district. But there's no community of interest. So therefore, when you start talking about planning and zoning and so on, and setting up this area planning commission, it's just not going to work for everybody. I mean, in my district, I could have 4 or 5 of them. You're only talking about 5 for the entire city. Let me remind you of another fact. Just in my district, we had 3 elected officials, and don't want to dwell on it, came and had a news conference in my area and said, let's not develop this area. Well, where do we need development except in the inner city? They protested developing, had a news conference. Now, they could be a part of this so-called area council. Now, we need it in our area, but I can certainly see some other affluent areas saying, oh no, we don't want to do anything there, because they haven't done anything there yet. It's been the most neglected communities in the city for many years, over and over again. And when we're trying to do something, the other communities are saying, no, don't do it over there. Now, that's going to be a real problem. And as I said early on, we try to keep them from knocking down some nice homes in a nice neighborhood, and we have what is available to us now, an interim control ordinance, and we are supporting the people in the community wanting to save their community. And the area might have said, let it go. But when the ordinance came in, some members of the council who just got up and left, who voted no, they let the neighborhood be destroyed. Now, and then they're going to come and say they support this? This is hogwash. That's the height of hypocrisy. And I won't mention any names.
Mr. President, I wanted to comment on one thing. Councilman Holden brought 2 points. One is, and I don't want to overstate your own staff's, the CLA, the CAO, or the city attorney in his office, support for this, because they haven't taken any positions on this. But throughout the process, we were painfully aware and concerned that we might do something that would create another problem. So throughout the process, all drafts of all work we did and all plans have been sent to all the offices, particularly the CLA, the CAO, and the City Attorney's Office, and we did send all drafts and proposals beginning back in August to the Mayor's office. The last thing we wanted was to have something occur that we weren't aware of. That doesn't mean we caught everything, and I'm particularly thankful of Councilwoman Goldberg's remark earlier, but we have tried to do that, and it wouldn't be the first time that they look at these issues. Secondly, with respect to the development issue that Councilman Holden raised, I think that what we've proposed may be somewhat of a help to him and his district, in that an area planning commission is going to be likely to be more sensitive to that development need in one area. And secondly, a neighborhood council is going to be, that is given some assistance from the neighborhood Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, is going to be likely to have some impact on that area planning that otherwise would be overwhelmed by neighboring interests that are already organized. So I think you could debate the issue as to which way it works, but our intention is actually to assist the local area that has an interest in development, whereas the area right next door does not, in reflecting that through the Neighborhood Council and the Area Planning Commission, as opposed to one planning commission for the whole city, and trying to balance that.
No, I just, in closing, Mr. President, I would just say that's where the problem is. That's where the problem lies. You have the Area Planning Commission. You have 5 of them. Presumably one would have 3 council districts, so to speak. And they would not have any common interest, so therefore no interest at all in certain areas as opposed to the one that they represent. And what I'm saying to you right now is that given that we have a smaller areas, 15 council areas, and even within each council area, you have neighborhoods that are different, no commonality there. and then one would like to impose what they don't want on another neighborhood. You're not going to have it being worked out where some council district in the 5th district is going to be so concerned about what we want to do in the 10th and try and make it right or correct the wrong. Not like it to happen, because it then becomes a preferential thing. I want what I want for me, and if I have the votes, I'll get what I want for me, and nothing is left for you. And that's what's happening over the years. They've gotten what they want, what they've been fighting for, and the inner city has got nothing, and not likely to get anything either.
All right, thank you, Mr. Holt. Ms. Goldberg?
Yes, thank you. Revenue collection transfers from the city clerk's office to the mayor's office of finance, correct? Okay. Are there any provisions to make sure that information about those collections are public and are recorded and are overseen? Right now, we have made revenue collection essentially as less political as possible, the least political as possible. It's not an elected official. It's not a person who can accept donations. What happens if you begin to see, or how would anyone ever know if revenue collection were based on looking a blind eye because, well, you got a donation from somebody, so we're not going to go see if you're paying the right amount? What is the check and balances on that? Next, you started out by saying, this part I must say I have some grievance with you folks, that you left the 150 intact. But the number of positions added that I can count for sure that you've added on exempt positions on the face on the first page is at least 60 or 70 more than we have now, which includes all deputy chiefs and all assistant general managers. And I do not think it is appropriate for you to say that it's the same number at 150 when you've added 60 or 70 more, and I think you should change your presentation. Next, DWP says the rate setting will not be done by the council. The rate setting will be done by the Board of Water, Department of Water Commissioners. I'm not sure the public's going to be thrilled by that. It also says that under Section 677 that surplus water, which they will determine what is surplus, can be sold outside the city. Next, I'm curious as to why you gave the mayor a policy veto, but removed the council's veto over the removal of commissioners, including commissioners that are now the managers of departments. Next, under contracts, sections 370E2 and 374. I have to turn to them because I can't do it without looking at them. Excuse me. Under 370E2, it says, contracts for the performance of professional, scientific, expert, or technical services of a temporary and occasional character do not require any bids. It's an exception to requiring bids. I don't know if that's such a good idea. How did you come to that determination? Under 374, whenever any board, officer, or employee is given the authority in the charter to construct any public work or improvement, that authority shall include the right to proceed either by contract or by direct employment of labor and purchase of materials in accordance with the charter. Right now, the decision to contract out has to include the decision as to whether or not it is cheaper or makes it more feasible in some fashion to deal with contracting out. This, by charter, says that if it's a public work, they can just contract it out. I want to know why you came up to that decision. Section 438 talks about removal of appointed officers. Does that mean department managers? Just, answer that one just yes or no right now. Is that, it says, so we can now have a petition to remove general managers?
That's already.
That's correct?
Always been there.
It's always been there?
As with some of the,
No kidding.
with 3 or 4 of the other provisions, they've always been there.
No kidding. So I never knew that. Learn something every day. And the city clerk, we also have always been able to do that. Wow, that's amazing. Is it also true that the initiative always took 15% of the candidate, of the signatures for mayor, but referendum only took 10%? That's all been the same?
No change.
Pretty odd. Okay, well, that's the list I have for at the moment. I'll come back, but the ones I would like you to talk to us about, though, are the revenue collection and the city clerk, rate setting, and the 60 to 70 positions that are exempt on the front page, and the removing of the veto over commissioner removal, but adding a veto to the mayor, to whole sets of things that the mayor never had veto power over before.
Okay, you want to, George?
All right. I don't know that I got every point, but with respect to the exempt positions, I think the councilwoman is absolutely correct, and it should be corrected. Those deal with the assistant managers, the two in each department, and she's absolutely right, and those should be added, and the police department. I would also note at the same time that those were agreed in discussions between and with management and labor on those issues, although you may have a different view from a particular person within that group, but that's absolutely correct, and they should be restated. With respect to the DWP and rate approval, I believe that's subject to ordinance.
Subject to ordinance, yeah.
And again, in so many areas, we've put it back in the council's hands to deal with it by ordinance.
6-6.
With respect to revenue collection, and I'll have to refresh myself on that, and Mary, do you have, we may have to get back to you on that one, as I haven't turned to that page just yet.
It's Office of Finance.
The Office of Finance does the revenue collection. That's correct. Well, it's in just like the other departments, any of the other departments, it is a department of the government, and would have the same kinds of oversight of those activities as you would have over any of the other departments in the government.
So it's not going to be located in the mayor's office?
No.
I'm sorry, I was misinformed.
No, but the only thing that's in the mayor's office, or has an option to be in the mayor's office, is additional budget, a budget office. But
Wasn't that sometimes called a finance office?
It's different in this case.
No, but I'm saying that's probably where the...
Yeah, that could be the cause of the
Very
confusion.
good. And adding a veto and removing a veto?
Adding a
veto to the mayor on all policy matters, but removing a veto on us on commissioners?
When you say adding the veto on the policy matters...
Governmental relations that the mayor now has a veto.
Oh, I see. All right, by acting by ordinance. I think it's a policy choice. There's no question that in some of these areas we made choices, and that was one area, frankly, that was of discussion with the elected commission on the commissioner's role. I think that we were comforted, and I happen to be, let me go back, when we discussed this in our own commission, there was a debate about whether the proprietaries should be made more independent or less independent. And there's a difference of opinion throughout the government on that. There are those within the government outside the mayor's office who think that they ought to be part of the general structure, and they ought to be appointed by the mayor, the general managers, and operate as the other departments. We had a close vote on that. I was somebody who was pushing for more independence, frankly. When we were in discussions with the elected commission, this is one area where we agreed to compromise. And I think we were comforted, as I say, by a couple of things. First of all, in the history of the city, there have been few occasions where the removal of a commissioner was challenged by the city council. Secondly, the general manager is still removed, even if it's removed by the commission, it's subject to council oversight. So to the extent that I, as one of the leaders in saying that we ought to have that protection, and the commission there had to make a compromise in that area, and I was comforted by those things, as were other commissioners at the time.
We retain the ability to confirm or reject a subsequent commission appointment.
Always, always.
The policy issue which we really needed, the removal being predicated on, we just simply
Oh,
reject.
yeah. Let's Mike, let's do it routinely and properly.
I think just to add to that then, as you point out, Councilman, you do have the confirmation ability with respect to all commissioners and all general managers, of course, and approve two-thirds veto over a removal of general managers. But yes, that was probably the third thing that comforted us on that point.
I'm sorry, there's just one other little question, and I probably won't have to speak again. Under the contract section, I think it's in the 300s, you refer to the very first section, 370. The contract shall be signed on behalf of the city by the mayor or the board or officer or employee authorized to enter into the contract, or in the case of the contract authorized by council, the person authorized by the council. How is it to be determined which it will be? And then secondly, on the next page, under notice, letter D, it says the city shall reserve the right to reject any and all bids, etc., in the middle of paragraph of section D, page 50. Who is the city when you refer to the city in the document?
I'll try to address some of your contract questions. The first one having to do with the exception from competitive bidding for professional services of a temporary nature.
Just talk into the microphone, she'll be able to hear you better.
Okay. That is an existing exception to the competitive bidding.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about 370 up at the top of the page on 49.
Right. I was going back to some of your earlier questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And the section 374, which you had mentioned, which allows the city to contract for public works projects. The end of that phrase says in accordance with the charter. That's also an existing provision. That's not something that we have added. And the section that you may be thinking of is 1022, which does retain the current requirements of making.
Okay. When they're separated, it's hard to keep track.
No, I think it's a very good point. We should look at whether both of those sections are still necessary or whether we need a cross-reference so there isn't a confusion there on those.
1072, you think?
1022.
1022, I'll look that up, thank you.
370.
D, who is the city?
That would be whoever on the particular contract is authorized by the charter to make the award of the contract.
And where would I find that?
In some cases, that would be the proprietary departments on contracts that are within.
What contracts does the mayor approve?
I think I have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, and under B, under 370, what contracts does an officer or an employee enter into?
I think for the most part, the contracting authority would be with a board and not with an individual employee, but I believe there are circumstances in which a board can delegate to the general manager certain kinds of things that we may not think traditionally as contracts, but more like permits. Permits for use of a space at the airport, for example, is something that the board can delegate that authority to the general manager of the airports to enter into that kind of contract.
With or without a council approval?
Yes, the delegation of that kind of authority would not be with, would not require council approval.
I would again like to ask the CLA and the CAO's office to look at this particular section and to give us some indication about what the safeguards are.
Mrs. Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'll get back to my prior questions. The general manager versus Board of Public Works, I didn't hear a response on that. Questions were asked about litigation, and my concern was about the mayor having control of litigation, or any single entity having control of litigation. And I still have that concern, even as I read in here further about how you apportion the control of litigation. My concern would be about without the checks and balances, that, and even with the checks and balances, a person who wanted to, was not overseen by the council, could, or the city attorney, could give information to the other side, which would be very detrimental to the city, and not just to the council, to the city. And that's not such a far-fetched notion. Another concern that I had about who is to appoint the reapportionment group. when you talk about a citizen group to draw lines in reapportionment, who are they? Who does who is the appointing authority? What is the criteria for them? And what is the accountability factor for them? And why do you feel that a group of people who have no exposure in terms of election to the public is more accountable in terms of reapportionment than elected officials are? The other concern, or another concern, went to the neighborhood councils, to the accountability factor there. How do you perceive them to be accountable, or what accountability factors do you perceive that are built in here?
I'm sorry, would you repeat the last one, Councilwoman?
Neighborhood councils, what is the accountability factor or factors that you see there? What do you feel would make them more accountable to the public than elected council members? The elected council members are the people that the citizens have elected to serve them. What makes a neighborhood council more accountable than the council persons whom they can recall from office, or the public can not elect?
Let me try a couple of those.
Or
and
not
then-
re-elect.
and have Rafe try a couple. One of them on the reapportionment, Councilwoman, the decision about the reapportionment is yours. You appoint the reapportionment advisory reapportionment group, and it is advisory. It's set forth in here. It's pretty much the same composition as was determined for this particular Charter Reform Commission. And they hold public hearings and make recommendations to this council. And so the council picks, essentially, it's the council. There are a couple of other appointees in there for the city attorney and the controller and the mayor, but the bulk of it is made by the council. With respect to the accountability, I don't think you could argue that the neighborhood councils are more accountable fundamentally than you, which is why we're making them advisory. They are advisory only. But there is a sense that they're not there for accountability to them. It's to provide a further empowerment of the community to make its voice heard in an organized way, particularly those areas that are not as likely to do so through homeowner groups that are already pretty well organized. But with respect to accountability, I think the elected officials are still the most accountable by the virtue they're elected, and they are making decisions. And that's the principal reason we did not make them elected in the same sense that you would have to be if you were covered by the Voting Rights Act, and secondly, no decision-making authority. With respect to control of litigation and the GM with the Board of Public Works, I'd like Rafe to take a shot at that.
Okay. On Public Works, the current charter, Public Works is very different from basically all other departments. It has both a full-time managing commission, but that board also operates to make appointments of staff and in effect supervises the daily operation. So it in effect is both a managing commission and a general manager all at the same time. There was a decision made that that should not continue, that the board should be more like other managing commissions, which still gives it very great authority in areas of policy and in contracts and other matters, but that it should no longer also act as the general manager. So the main change there, and why to some extent it may look a little similar to the existing language, is because many of those managing functions are still there in Public Works, with the exception of being its own general manager. That now, there is that additional role is now not with the board, but with an actual general manager. So in effect, Public Works now would look more like a number of the other departments in the charter that are managing, that have managing commission. Except that it retains a full-time board, and that's the difference.
And if I may, you know that all of the departments that are in Public Works, the Public Works overseas, have general managers already. So you're talking about one general manager over a super general manager over all the other general managers, plus the Board of Public Works, which seems like an awful lot of management.
Yes, part of the motivation for this was evidence of the difficulty of long-range planning in the area of public works because of the decentralization of the bureaus and their relationship to the Board of Public Works. And only some of the bureau heads are technically general managers as general managers of other departments. And under this procedure, the general manager would be able to develop a broad perspective for policymaking in public works, would appoint the bureau heads, rather than having a series of bureau heads who, in the experience that was brought to the commission, the board has not always had the best opportunity to get a perspective of its own on what should be the broad policy. So the general manager would, in effect, begin to tie those bureaus together.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Hernandez?
Yeah, I just want to get back to, and again, I'm expressing some of the same concerns in regards to the city clerk's role and the Department of Finance. Currently, we have a scenario where we as policymakers hear from bureaucrats, particularly department heads, how they're on an ongoing basis being pretty much beat by the mayor's office to reduce cost, to basically submit budgets that aren't realistic to do a lot of the jobs that we require. One of the areas where I find that happening tends to be in the area of collections of revenues.
Put those on the...
And for whatever reason, you know, I've been viewing this process as we're a tree that's grown, we got a good charter, it's a solid tree, and you're trimming the branches so that it could continue to grow in a very positive nature, but we're creating a whole new Department of Finance. And that department's going to have the role of collecting taxes, the role of collecting revenues, and implementing policy. And it'll be pretty much under the direct jurisdiction of the mayor's office, in conjunction with a budget office that clearly is under the direction of the mayor's office. Now, we know that in the tax collection area, there's currently a tax reform package that is trying to simplify things, but basically providing certain people with leeway, and the argument is we haven't been collecting our taxes. And I've always looked at it, the reason we don't collect our taxes is we don't provide staff to do that. And we need to provide more staffing. So we're creating a new department. We're putting it under the jurisdiction of the auspices of how the mayor creates things, and the mayor oversees things. He has a budget process. Where does the council interact in that process? And how do we assure that basically the resources are being applied equally throughout the city, and there isn't favoritism being shown in one area or another when it comes to the function of collection of those revenues and tax reimbursements and so forth? Being that we know, and I don't know what discussion went on, and I'd like more direction from that perspective. What was the discussion that generated this will to create a whole new Department of Finance and take away from what the role of the city clerk was in terms of the keeper of the records and the keeper of the permit processes of the city of Los Angeles?
Give them all your knowledge, George. Won't take long.
Two things. One is the oversight function. The management audits are performed by the CAO and the Controller's Office under this charter, which would, the CAO currently has that authority, has not been always funded to that extent, but those audits will occur on a regular basis from two different authorities, which we think is one of the things we've done is to try to increase the oversight function of departments, and this would be one of them. With respect to the staffing, I think this gets at an issue, at least from my perspective, Councilman, is that if the mayor is responsible through the department for the functioning and collecting of taxes, and if he's responsible for putting together the budget, which he has always been, then it is difficult for him to complain that the taxes aren't being collected, because it's now under his direction, ultimately, in a managerial sense in one of the departments. So I think it's one way that we are trying to tie the accountability into the government by making the mayor and holding the mayor accountable for that. I think the protections then remain with respect to the oversight by council, the CAO, and the Controller's Office in terms of monitoring how that is done.
Mr. Savornich.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. Excuse me. Over the course of this process, there's been hundreds, maybe thousands of Angelenos, it's probably in the hundreds, that have participated in one way, shape, or another this process that has brought us here today. But as we know that there are millions of city residents who, at the end of the day in June, will have to make a decision on this very complex issue. And it's very easy for us to take a look at all of the little lines that are crossed out here and, you know, what does this and what does this and what does that. And I think it's going to have to be, when it comes to the voters at that time, it's going to have to be very simple. Now, there has been a consensus up to this point by some in the city government and some in the public that the charter is broken. Otherwise, why would we be endeavoring to fix it? And so, in the spirit of late-night television on David Letterman, I'd like to hear from our appointed officials and staff of what were the 10 most important things that you thought were broken. What are the 10 most important things that you think you fixed? Why did you fix them in that regard? In order that when we go to the public, either to support or not to support a unified charter, we can say, this what was wrong with the charter, this why the City of Los Angeles government was perceivedly not working, and this is how we fixed it. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what John Q. and Mary L. Public is going to be asking of us. What was wrong with the charter? What did you do to fix it? And now why is it better? And it's going to be as simple as that. All these little tweaks and all these little changes and all that, we policymakers get to do this ad nauseum over the course of the next 3-4 weeks, looking at all the T's and the I's and the periods and the commas. But by the time it gets to the public, it won't be that. And so here tonight, here this afternoon at 1:20, this being a little after tonight, once it's replayed around 10:30, 10:45 tonight, for those few individuals who will be watching this debate, and for some who may read it in the paper tomorrow, I think it would be fair to identify to the public at large, this is what was identified as being wrong, this is what we did to fix it, and this is why. And I'd like to have you guys give us an opportunity right now to hear from your perspective what was fundamentally broken, what did you fundamentally fix, and why did you fix it in that regard? Simplify it as much as you can.
I'm only disappointed because in presenting our presentation, we try to do a little bit of that, but let me go back, Councilman. I think that the debate sometimes gets out of hand on both sides on this, as to whether the charter is broken, or whether, on the one hand, or whether there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Any document that a municipality would be dealing with for 75 years without some kind of an overall review, you'd want to review it from time to time as a whole, simply to decide whether provisions that you might not have known were in the charter are still applicable or not. And that's part of our process. But so I think that in terms of just renewal and review, that process has not been done, except once when it was defeated by the vote, or twice when it was defeated by the voters in 70 and 71, in 75 years. So that general review as a whole, not in a piecemeal basis, as a whole, I think is useful. But here are the things that we found could be improved, because we didn't necessarily find that the charter was broken. And I think it's unfair to say that the charter is broken, but it makes better headlines. And that is that with respect to participation, the city has changed dramatically, grown dramatically in 75 years. With the overlap of other governments on it, things are much more complex than they used to be with respect to the operations of governments of all kinds. And the opportunities for participation of individuals in the government are difficult in this city. The growing diversity of this city, as well as the size and area, require extra efforts to be made with respect to the involvement of the public in their government. And so in that area, one of those areas, there are maybe 4 or 5 that come into your top 10. One would be the opportunity for the organization of neighborhood councils in an advisory form. Secondly would be bringing planning to a more geographically near area by creating area planning commissions, at least 5. A third would be an opportunity for the voters to decide whether they want to increase the size of the city council. A fourth, to allay suspicions that have occurred over the years that redistricting is a process that is affected by politics in a malicious way rather than a productive way. Our own conclusions on that is that primarily that has not been the case, but our own polling, review of polls and focus groups indicate that the public has that suspicion, and the establishment of an independent advisory redistricting commission is of assistance to the council in creating the credibility with the public with respect to that, but while leaving the districting task itself to the council. So that would be 4 or 5 of the areas. The 6th or 7th might be in the area of accountability, that it's unclear in some areas who's responsible for what. And in that area, we have made a definite decision to increase, in a number of areas, the authority of the mayor with respect to the management of the government. Those would include flexibility to structure his own office, the authority to do merit pay reviews and report them to the council, to issue the executive directives we've talked about, to represent the city in intergovernmental relations, and to oversee his own executive budget office. These things we think strengthen the mayor, still maintain the council as the governmental entity that it is in this city, a very strong entity, but give the mayor more management authority over the city. And finally, I've probably covered 9. The 10th, which is boring to most of the public, but is still, I think, important, is a review of the charter itself. All these myriad of provisions that have been there over the years, do they still deserve to be there or not? Are they more restrictive than liberating? Our approach on that has actually been, in the end, to give the council and the mayor together as a government operating more flexibility to operate the government for the 21st century, to respond and to deliver services in a more modern and contemporary way. There have been provisions in the charter in the past that have restricted your ability to pay for services in advance, because in 1925 people thought that was a bad idea. Well, today services are marketed by phone companies and others in a way that you can pay in advance and receive reductions in your costs. Still decisions made by this government through this council, but restricted in the charter in the past. Those kinds of restrictions we've reviewed, and in many cases we've decided that that ought to be left to you to determine whether that's still a good idea or not. It ought not be in the charter. So that may be 10, and it may be more than that, Councilman. It may not be exactly the top 10, but it's probably up there. And if Rafe or Mary have 1 or 2 to add, I'd appreciate it.
I would just add to it, although it's pretty much agreeing with what George is saying. The public will be drawn, we think, most to the issues of responsiveness that are listed, neighborhood councils, area planning commissions. We didn't detect any mass insurgency to clean up the charter or a number of other things. However, the benefits of cleaning up the charter and leaving more to ordinance and straightening the lines of accountability have a lot to do with how this charter will be perceived 4 or 5 years from now, when the benefits of that are seen in the policies that will be seen, I think, also responsively in a very, very positive way. So they may not be the main selling points to the public, but to the people in this room and people who study and observe government in Los Angeles, they'll be very important selling points. What the public has been drawn to in our outreach very much is the opportunities for participation, which get extremely excited and enthusiastic responses. But many of the best benefits of this unified charter will be seen over the next few years in policymaking, most likely.
Ms. Sikowski.
I would like to follow up on 2 issues that have already been raised, and one was that Ms. Goldberg raised about the issue of putting in the charter now the authority for the mayor under executive directive. And I was asking and trying to get the reference as to where the executive directive authority now exists, and in fact it's not in the charter, it's essentially a policy. I am aware in the past when very, very forceful executive directives have been issued and had an immediate and abrupt and necessary effect of law. And I'm remembering, for those in the who are in the council in the late 80s, 1987, the city lost a major lawsuit called Friends of Westwood. Friends of Westwood was the suit brought by a community group who were reacting to the fact that on the old ship site in Westwood, A 27-story building was built with no discretionary review, no input from the community, no effort at the city council or any planning agency to look at it. It was just de facto issuance of permits. That's the way the city perceived its operation of law. The lawsuit that came down said the city is very wrong, there were discretionary actions along the way, and we should do something different. Mayor Bradley issued in 1987 an executive directive that said that's not the way we're going to do it any longer. Every department, these are the new guidelines, this is how we're going to follow it, etc. It had the effect of an ordinance, and in fact that's the way we acted, and the council later adopted ordinances to do everything that was in the executive directive. So in fact that was appropriate. What I'm concerned about here is, and I want you to see if you can confirm for me, where you've said time and again that the council shall create the parameters and the ordinance by which these things can occur. Right now, where this says the executive directive can just be issued by the mayor, can the council require, or by ordinance say, that when the mayor issues an executive directive, it shall be issued publicly, it shall have some period of time before which it goes into effect so everyone has a chance to digest it, and or then the council I understand, as you've indicated time and again, that the council sets the parameters around which the structure of these things can occur, and I would like your confirmation of that. And the other issue I would like some addressing is you addressed Ms. Walters' issue on the new office or director of public works, the general manager, and at the same time keeping the full-time board of public works. In years past, any number of times, there were on occasion efforts to make the Public Works Board more like all the other advisory commissions and create a general manager of the department. And I guess my question is, why, when you've elevated a new general manager oversight for all the Department of Public Works, why you also retained a full-time Board of Public Works as opposed to putting it in the process of more like all the other city departments where it's a general manager in charge governed by an advisory commission or board. And so if you can address both of those questions, I'd appreciate it.
Well, did you want to?
Just quickly on executive orders, that there's really two questions implied in what you're saying. One is that these executive orders must be consistent with the charter or ordinance in terms of policy. I think that's just one thing to make certain that that's absolutely clear and that's written in here, and that it only takes effect in the absence of conflicting provisions in the charter or ordinance. The second question, though, is would there be something to change in terms of making these more public or more visible? That would have to, the wording would have to be worked on.
Well, would the wording be worked on in there, or could we work on it by way of exactly you talked in every other instance, an implementation ordinance by which the council would say, without stepping on the authority of the mayor to do it, other than what you've specified here, how the process of making it made known could be created?
I think the wording would have to be changed, because what this references to is just the consistency with existing ordinances, that the policy cannot be inconsistent. So there would probably have to be some other phrasing that we would all look at that would achieve the goal of making sure it's open.
Councilwoman, I agree that we would want to, having brought this to our attention, would want to put that in the charter with respect to the public notice on those directives or orders. Generally, if what you're doing is not affecting the power, then, and I think the city attorney's office would want to opine on that, would define the extent to which by ordinance you can color something that's already been given. I think that falls in a gray area, so what you want to do, I think, on this is on the public notice on those directives, we would want to put it in the charter. With respect to the Board of Public Works, I think that this is a more difficult answer, perhaps. It's a little fuzzier. And I'll take a shot as a commissioner. I think in many respects, we don't see this as the end of a review of the charter, and government's going to always be evolving over time. We talked earlier of a Department of Finance, which is not uncommon in other municipalities, having tax collection functions, but also maybe growing in some way depending on what this council or future councils may decide. The Board of Public Works may be a moving target over time. There has been widespread interest in changing the Board of Public Works. It's also clear over a period of time that it has not changed, and it has a certain public support to it. and it functions in a way that provides certain public involvement in a way that this council alone couldn't provide, or maybe another department without a full-time board could provide. So what we've proposed is, I think, in some ways might be an interim step, and that is to say that the general manager can provide a coordinating function among those bureaus that we believe a group of 5 is not as equipped to handle. At the same time, the full-time board seems to have public support, and is particularly in the area of holding hearings and pursuing issues that are of interest to the public, questions on service and so forth, and that is not entirely inconsistent with having the general manager. Over time, that may be something that develops from that if this council wants to in future charter changes, or not. But we thought it was a good step to take with respect to at least coordinating the bureaus in their providing the services.
Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Walters. Members, we're going to, Mrs. Chick has a doctor's appointment, so we're going to be adjourning pretty soon, so go ahead, Mrs. Walters, you have the floor.
All right, back to Public Works again. Mr. Kiefer was indicating that over time it may change, the functions would change. The charter still calls for them to do their work on a full-time basis. Yes. And you reference them to act more like other managing commissions. But other managing commissions are not full-time, and they don't get a cent, or maybe $10 or something. So what are you, what are you saying here? That their salaries should continue? That they should or should not be paid like other commissions? Or that they should continue status quo?
They should continue as a full-time managing commission. We're not changing that, and when I say it might change over time, that would only be through another charter change, that you would be able to change their function as a full-time managing commission. Is that correct on that?
Yeah, I think that if I could just go back for 1 second to discussions we had during testimony on this, one of the questions that was raised is what is the exact workload of the Board of Public Works, and the information was useful. It didn't entirely provide the answer to the question. I think the sense is that after a few years of operation with a general manager and with the board doing the functions that are listed here, it may be possible to revisit this at that time and answer the question, given the existence of a general manager, does this still require a full-time paid board? It's impossible to assess now because their obligations are so global now that they're both general manager and members of a board. Now, should that lead to a desire for change, that would have to be by another charter amendment, because as you point out, Councilmember, these are currently in the charter. But I think more information will be available after a few years' experience of this board operating with a general manager about whether their workload really is full-time or not.
Okay. And lastly, I have a question. You have left the salary setting function for the Board of Education to the state. As a former member of the Board of Education for some 12 years, about half those years that I was there, the salary was $1,200 a month, and that was it. Or it was $1,000 a month, and it was $12,000 for the year. It is very difficult to keep, at that time, the time I was elected, I was a single parent with a daughter who had just graduated from college and two sons that still required support at that time. It's a very difficult thing to do. I witnessed Ms. Goldberg, for example, being denied a right to teach at Cal State University because it was interpreted as a conflict of interest. Myself, after I earned a graduate degree in business, the school district does business with the whole universe. So I couldn't apply as a school board member for a job with the business. One of our members' wife taught in a program outside the school district that was under contract to the school district, and she had to quit her job because of the concern for conflict of interest. Now, yet they still had to live on $1,000 a month. Then the salary was doubled. It was $2,000 a month, which was a great big increase, right? It's still not enough to really do the job that's required, and it's a full-time job. Whether we like the decisions, whether we like the people who are currently there, that is not the point. There are a lot of folks that don't like the council, don't like our decisions, but nobody comes after us on the issue of salary. And I'd have to say, I have my problems with some of the board members, but they deserve, if they're putting in a salary, putting in full days' time, day after day, week after week, weekends, nights, all the time, just like council folks, they don't deserve to be treated as second-class citizens. There ought to be, we talk about a livable wage being in here. That's not a livable wage for them.
You have any comments on that?
Yes. There was considerable discussion in the commission on that and a considerable amount of research, and it was a difficult question for the following reason. To the extent that it is a full-time job, the pay is very low. However, this is a problem with the school board system throughout the entire United States. In fact, with the exception of Florida, the school board members in Los Angeles are actually the highest paid practically in the United States, and that was of some compelling value. And what it raised, I'm sorry. I don't have the numbers with me, but New York was comparable, was in the same range. Part of what developed was a debate about what should be done with the schools, what should be the direction of the schools, and what should the role of the Board of Education be in the schools. And there are many sides to this debate, including those who argue that the board should not be a full-time body, but should be a policy-making body. Others who raised even different questions about the nature of the board. As you know, this has been a very complex political question. However, the problem for the commission was that where districts, like in Florida, have gone to a somewhat higher compensation, which still is not very high, it has been through changes in state law where formulas are established by population of the districts, rather than an individual district at a time adopting a salary. And when it was considered that do you pick a fixed salary, such as a cost of living increase one time, or do you tie that to something else? Pretty quickly, Los Angeles, under almost any formula, would have been far and away the highest paid school board in the United States, and yet a number of other school boards also have virtually full-time obligations and comparably sized school districts. Ultimately, what I think the sense of the commission was is that this should be handled. There was a problem here, and it should be handled at the state level as it was in Florida through calculating should the largest school district's level of compensation, which is now set at roughly $24,000, should that be increased. And I imagine a lot of people involved in our commission's work would work and advocate for that change, but ended up feeling that it was not the wisest policy to make a one-time or escalator change of such a large size within the charter at this time.
Before we close, we have two items motions that were presented, 1A and 1B. Is there any objections to those motions? Seeing none, those will be approved. I wanted to ask you about the Public Works Board. You said that we could revisit that in 2 years. Would it take a charter change to eliminate the full-time position?
Yes, it would.
Okay. All right. Members,
Mr. President, we do have a verbal motion on the desk.
the verbal, what's a verbal motion?
Ms. Goldberg, Mr. Goldberg.
To do what?
That the CLA report regarding public access to information and potential mischecks.
Well, I think they're being asked to review the whole thing and get back to us. I would imagine that would include that. So. I don't have any problem. Yeah. Let me just say that this was a council's first special meeting on this to consider this unified charter, and the public was invited to comment, and we will allow them to do so at the regular meetings of the council. The next council special meeting will be to consider the charter will be held Monday, February 22nd. I want to thank you and all of you for coming here today and spending, what is it, 3-4 hours answering questions, and I think you did a very, obviously you've studied this charter very well, and you've had good answers for almost every question that was put to you. So again, we want to thank you very much. And with that, members of the council, if there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting. We didn't have any food here because that cheapskate Ron Deaton wouldn't allow us to have any, so. Yeah.